Good evening and welcome to the May 7th meeting of the Development Commission. Tonight we will be considering the site development permit and shoreline substantial development permit for the 7th at Gilman project, file numbers SDP 13-00005 and SHO 13-00014. For the benefit of those of you who have not been here before, I'll take a little brief time to tell you how this process is going to work tonight. We're going to start with a presentation, a joint presentation by city staff and by the applicant that will address the issues and the questions and concerns that were raised at our April meeting about this project. And this will be a joint informal presentation that is designed to cover all of the relevant bases and the issues and to avoid redundancy and to be as efficient as we can at the same time covering the issues. During this presentation, this first one, the commissioners can ask questions of the city staff and applicants during that portion of the meeting. That will be followed by public comment. And after the public comment, the staff and the applicants will have another opportunity to address issues or to rebut positions that were articulated by members of the public. Following the public comment and the staff and applicant comment, the Development Commission will then do their follow-up, and we hope will arrive at a decision. Okay? So with that, I will turn it over to Jerry Lind of the city staff and our applicant.
Are you maybe going to go over the minutes first? How about if we do that from the previous?
Let's do that. The minutes for the April meeting have been provided to us. I personally have no changes in them. Were there any other changes? Can I get a motion? Or
I move
Mike,
approval of the April 16th, 2014 Development Commission meeting minutes.
Second. Is there a discussion?
I'm good.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Opposed? All right. They are approved unanimously. Now, Jerry. Okay.
So this evening is a quasi-judicial matter on which the Development Commission is the decision maker. And so I'm going to run through a checklist of questions to ensure that you are impartial decision makers. So I don't have my usual checklist, so there's going to be more questions than normal. And all you have to do is say yes or no as I ask the questions, and you can say them in unison. We don't have to go through and pull. Are there any family relationships between the decision makers and parties at the hearing?
No.
Is there any business competition between the decision maker and any parties at the hearing?
No.
No.
Will there be any prospective employment for the decision maker or his or her family as a result of the decision?
No.
No.
Does the decision maker have any personal interest in which he or she stands to gain or lose by the decision?
No.
No.
Is the decision maker free from any direct or indirect financial benefit that could result from the approval or denial of the request?
That would be yes. Would be there's no financial gain.
No.
Oh, okay.
Free of.
Yes.
Would be a yes.
Has there been any ex parte communication? And I'm happy to explain what ex parte communication is if anyone has.
No.
Okay. And so if anyone has an objection concerning whether they feel that any commissioner could be objective, now would be the time to identify that.
Does that apply just to the ones that are here, or?
So yes, the people who will be making the decision, and so it's a question of whether anyone has any concerns about their objectivity.
And then the ones that aren't here,
Right, because they're not making the decision. Okay.
How does that work? I mean, is this, the last time we saw the chairs full, so is there just?
I can explain, we have a quorum. The regulations require 4 members of the Development Commission to compose a quorum, and we have a quorum.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if it was part of the people who were here last time.
No.
We have
No, they-
7 standard members, and we knew 2 of them would not be present tonight. We still may get a 5th member, too, that may be running late.
Oh, just want to understand.
And one other thing that I neglected to mention, if any member of the public who would like to speak in the public session, we'd ask you to sign in, please, with your name and, excuse me, your address and your phone number as well. And that will be part of it. And then when you come up to speak, we'd like you to go to the microphone and repeat that information, your name and your address, okay?
The clipboard and the pen is right up here on the
Yeah,
main
right on the
table.
table.
And by signing in, you will be, officially, most of you already are, but you'll be a party of record, too. Good evening again. The 7th at Gilman is the name of the project, and it's also got another new name since we met last year. It's also now called Atlas. So I think we've seen also the name Cadence, so that one you want to erase from your mind since we've it's evolved, and it's possible it could change again. This is the vicinity map where it's located. It's the site of the current Gilman Square Shopping Center. That's also the same site where Lombardi's Restaurant is banned, and the Antique Mall, which is still in operation at the site. There's a little white void there you'll see, and that means the site wraps around the KFC, Taco Bell site, and also O'Reilly's Auto Parts. And so those 2 lots are not part of this project tonight. That's a aerial photo. You saw this with the last presentation, so you can kind of see what the site looks like. It's you got the buildings in kind of an L shape. A lot of parking in this area. Not too much greenery except what is along Issaquah Creek. That's an area that will be restored as part of the project proposal. Very irregular shape. Gilman Boulevard is to the north. 7th Avenue is to the west. And Northwest Locust Street is to the south, and the eastern boundary is Issaquah Creek. There's a little peninsula that's it's not a deeded street, but it certainly works as a street at the southeast corner. There's a dental office to the east of it, and a little preschool operation to the west of that it surrounds. The description, there's 3 buildings, and they're all 5 stories apiece. There's below parking, below the buildings. Building A is to the north. Buildings B and C are to the south, facing 7th and also Locust Street. And there's a center parking garage that will serve those 2 buildings. 346 stacked apartments, and it may be 344. That number is kind of varied as the project has evolved. Acreage is the same at 6.09 acres. And there's approximately 400 parking stalls that will serve these units. They're all apartments, they're not condominiums. There will be a park with this. There is a shared use route with it too that is part of our Central Issaquah plan. It connects various walkways throughout the site. There's a landscape flood swale. You saw that with the last project that runs to the northwest corner of the site, ties in with the Gilman Ditch. Buffer improvements along Issaquah Creek, and street improvements. So really we're seeing a total reface of this project site. There were several elements that came out of our last meeting in April, and these were issues that came both from our Development Commission and the members in our audience too. And so I've seen the staff reports. I'll at least read the headline so we understand. Building design was one of the main concerns that came out of the project. The issues were the buildings appear plain in contrast to the landscape. Add solar screens or richer materials. The tops of the buildings are rather flat and uninteresting. The color palette is bold and caution needs to be considered in the use of colors. The material board is again on this table here. It's got 3 primary colors. The buildings have a rather flat, severe, uninteresting appearance, and further modulation in the plan should be examined. How will the buildings appear from Interstate 90 was a question. What will they look like? Like big rectangles? This doesn't look like Issaquah, and so the question always comes up, what does the Issaquah look to? So the buildings, as I said here, they are designed regulated by Chapter 14 of the Central Issaquah Plan. It doesn't have everything that the audience spoke about, but does have a number of elements that we believe are being provided in this. It's not a large, massive building. It's actually 3 buildings. When they get to a certain size, they are required to be broken up, and that's what has occurred here. The architectural detail was not as evident with the last presentation. There is supposed to be this distinguishing base, middle, and top of the building. So we're looking at the tops of the buildings where the parapets are. They were rather flat, stationary at a single line. Now there's a little bit more modulation and varied heights with those modulations. And you'll see some cornice details, I think, that adds to what you needed. The building is broken up in different planes between the 2nd and 3rd floors, and you'll see that with some drawings that I'm going to show you too. There's a lot more brick elements also now with the building too, so I think this makes it a little bit richer in the material design. It has the vertical and horizontal modulation, so we don't have blank walls on any of the walls. There's a lot of windows, there's a lot of window panes, so they're not just blank windows. They're actually broken up. You'll see that there are unique corners on these buildings that you didn't see last time. There's some slanted elements over the lobby areas above those corners of the buildings, and the sloped roofs we think really brings things out a lot more too. So you'll see that with the twisted corners that's done for these buildings, and this is at the prominent corners as you enter. Lobbies are below it. You can see on some of these buildings, is this pointing? Yes. So you can see the 3 floors and then how the buildings are stepped back. And there's balconies and lanais that are incorporated into. So you don't have the flatness. It's more varied, which is the middle part that was required. You'll see down here as an example of a building parapet, and they seem to vary on the buildings. We do allow these architectural type pediments too, so it's not only a function but also an architectural element too, to give a little bit more variation with the roof heights. This photo that you see on the lower right you have not seen before. You'll see how it's got that sloped element with the roofs, and you'll see this with all 3 buildings to kind of accent the importance of those spaces. So one of the requirements was to make these corners a little bit more of a special entry. So we believe this roofing element, the twisted corners, helps it. The colors again are on the table here. There's a green, a red, and a blue, and it's not massively used, those colors, but it will help residents identify which building they live in. They can certainly tell their visitors, I live in the blue building or I live in the red building. It helps identify where they're at. It's mostly in accent colors within some of the corners of the building, so it's not solidly used. Do you want to add anything to it or see some of these other drawings, Ellen, too, which we were talking about since we're going to do this jointly?
Yeah, my name's Alan Granger, GGLO Architects, and Jerry and I agreed that we could actually do a little show together here so that we didn't have to go all the way back to the beginning and talk about the topics separated.
Would you like me to bring up that other one, too, that we were just talking about?
Let's bring up the overall, let's bring up this one.
Okay, let's bring up this one here. This shows all 3 buildings in one.
One of the aspects of the buildings which we believe was not clearly understood before. Because we were looking at straight elevations, and because there was a lot of discussion about why don't you add more modulation to the buildings, we felt that if we started to look, we usually look from the sidewalk up at the buildings, but I'm purposefully looking down on the buildings here, so that you can see that there's not only the modulation where the buildings are stepping in and out, but there is the courtyards that are on the buildings, courtyard on this building. I'm just going to go to moving around, looking from the southeast. You can start to see that there is a fairly extensive modulation on this building. And then actually I'm going to go back to, this is looking at the corner from 7th and Gilman. One of the changes that we made as we discussed the comments from the public and the Development Commission was we discussed with staff changing the corner at 7th and Gilman, and we actually, where this twisted corner came all the way down to grade before, we've actually raised that up, and it starts to add more interest at that corner. The use of the colors that Jerry was talking about are primarily in the upper levels of these corners. Here you can see what Jerry was talking about with the 3-story sort of masonry bases that are bays running along.
There's penthouses on the top. Those are hiding the HVAC equipment fully. You won't see that from the ground surface. Perhaps if a taller building gets built there in the future, you will see that. The buildings will be somewhat visible from Interstate 92, but as the Central Issaquah plan evolves and buildings are added to this region, they'll certainly blend in and be less visible with additional buildings and landscaping too.
I'm just going to help understand the modulation of each individual building now that we've looked at the overall site. This is Building A, which is the one in the northwest corner. And again, I'm looking from 7th and Gilman, and pretty much the same photograph as we were before, but from more down at the ground level, you can see that one of the things that we have done is we've varied the heights of all the parapets. So a number of the parapets we've taken down to the minimum that are feasible from a constructability, from the waterproofing of the edge of the roof. But other places we have raised the parapet. This is one of the areas that is all masonry. That has been raised up with a parapet detail at the top. And then at the corner entrance that Jerry was just talking about, I think I'll be able to go down to there. We've actually taken that low point, and you can start to see the difference in heights that we're getting here. And we've actually increased that corner up as Jerry was describing. So we're getting varying heights as we go around the building. And then you can see it stepping down again up. So we're manipulating with the 3-dimensional massing as to where the buildings are modulated in plane. We're also now modulating it more extensively vertically so that we're accentuating those elements. And I'm just going to sort of continue around until we get all the way around the building. And I was, studying the aerial photographs of the neighborhood, and actually there was concern about how the buildings might look from Interstate 90. Probably the clearest place where you would see these buildings from Interstate 90 is actually once you've gone across Issaquah Creek traveling east, and as you drive past the post office site, the driver shouldn't be doing this, the passenger can do this. And you're going across the overpass by the post office. That is actually where there are less trees and less buildings, and you would probably, from that point, you'd start to look back. And this is the sort of viewpoint from considerably further away. that you'd start to get. So from that vantage point, the buildings actually, you start to see the courtyards on Building A, you start to see the courtyards on Building C, and how they're all relating together.
Al, I have a question. You know, under this new
I'm sorry.
procedure where we can ask questions in
Oh,
this
all right.
portion, you mentioned earlier waterproofing. You said the parapets have been lowered to the point that, the lowest point that allowed waterproof.
Or just that we
Where-
have a constructability
Right.
analysis of the detail.
I don't see, how do you propose to handle it's a flat roof building, right?
Basically a flat
So
roof.
where's the drainage capability?
Actually, all the roofs are sloping from the exterior of the building, and they're sloping down to the middle of the roof.
Oh.
And the roof drainage is all coming down. If you would imagine where the corridors are in the buildings, in the middle of the building. So all the roof drainage is coming down in chases adjacent to the corridors in the building. So we don't have any exterior downspouts that are showing on the exterior of the building. It's all internal to the building.
Mr. Chair, a quick question. So, as far as you've talked about the cap detail on top of the parapets, and remind me of, or maybe you didn't have this in the previous design that you showed us, but is there a color transition that's going on there in addition to just I guess the idea was, and I mentioned in the staff report, creating the bottom, the middle, and the top. And
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a big top, but something that's kind of a visual definition of the top of the building that varies from the rest.
Depending on the exterior materials, we're actually treating the detail of the cornice differently.
Which is this piece right here.
Yeah. So where we have the masonry coming up, we actually have a metal cornice which is shaped, which is the termination of how, sorry, I said the metal. The brick, where the brick is coming up, the masonry is coming up, we have a metal cornice which is acting as the detail cap for the top of those. The corners where the accent colors are located are all panels which have got metal reveals between all of those panels. And those panels, we are actually not adding additional surface treatment to the outside of those. Those are actually terminating. Oh, thank you, Vanna.
And there's some wooden elements in it too, and the black and white doesn't show all that detailing of the brick,
Yeah.
the wood, and the other elements.
I hope you didn't hear me call you Vanna.
I said that.
I'm going to go on to Building B. And so you can see here also on Building B, we've got the same slope that's continuing up and accenting the corner. Building B was one of the areas where we, I think we talked about this last time, but we actually took out second floor units here, which was why Jerry's been so confused about how many units do we have in this building.
Well, the units have been taken out. This is for future conversion where it could be used for commercial space too, and that's one of the elements of the Central Issaquah plan. This is not a mixed-use project. It's fully residential.
Fully residential.
Both are allowed, but it's not required to be commercial or have that in it. But there is a part of the plan that does require to look at the buildings in the future for other possible uses.
So the whole end of the west wing of Building B, and this is the wing that is directly across the street from where the Starbucks is, and it's where the shared use trail will come across 7th from the west side of the street and start to go through this project. So our client gave us the ability to actually reduce the number of residential units. And so we took them out on the second floor, and this has made double high spaces, which are appropriate for the entries in the short term. But if there was any change in use in the future, it would be the appropriate height for a different use in the future. You can start to see the smaller, we've got different sizes of caps as we go around, depending on what the materials are. This is an area of the building where we have board and batten siding, which will be painted, and we're looking at getting a deeper board trim along the top of all of where that material occurs. So running around Building B, and this is the corner down at Locust and 7th. And then coming around, and you can start to see how the modulation occurs through the shared use, I mean, not the shared use trail, the, what's it called?
This is the corridor between buildings B
Yeah,
and
what do
C.
you call that in your zoning code? I forgot, my mind's gone blank. The space between the buildings that the mid-block connection, thank you. So this is looking down there, and you can see on each side of that, we have got the 3-story bays repeating again to reduce the scale.
We actually call it through-block passage.
I knew you had a special name.
Yes, it is kind of.
A through,
Well, we're going to be talking about that too in
Yeah.
one of the other slides too.
yeah. Do you want me to go on to, while I'm here, do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, and just that note, it is contemporary architecture too. I know that was one of the questions that came out of the audience last time, and in fact, somebody even gave me a photograph of Versailles in France, for Gilman Boulevard. But, we don't require that level of architecture, and the Central Issaquah plan doesn't deal with those kind of specific elements too, as far as the architectural style or color. So it really kind of leaves it up to the applicant to come up with those.
So while we're talking about the modulation of the buildings, one of the questions that came up was the solar exposure of all the courtyards.
What do you want us to get to that part of the, we have another part, we have another slide.
You want to
for
get
that.
to something else?
Well, let's not jump ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we haven't rehearsed this.
It's actually better.
I can find where I was. I think this is it, and these are some of the elements that you were talking about too, Alan.
Yes.
Gilman Boulevard, number 2, that was the driveway question. The westernmost driveway to the site, it is being moved eastward. It's about 110 feet eastward. And then there was a question about, as you can see in the little snippet down here at the bottom, there's 3 driveways. The westernmost already currently serves both developments. Moving it further eastward, it will continue to serve both the 7th at Gilman site as well as the O'Reilly's Auto store. The easternmost one is on the property line. It's also on the subject site too, so it's on there by easement. There's not much we can do about the fact that there's 3 driveways until that property redevelops, but it's not a violation either. They all have right in, right out turn movements only. And so your only left turn movements will actually be further west at 7th, where there'll be a new traffic signal in place.
And Jerry, I have a question about that. The traffic on, the signals on Gilman are synchronized?
Are they synchronized?
Yes.
They have been, yes. And
So this will be a continuation of the synchronization
it'll have to be,
process?
yes.
Oh, just while you're here.
Okay.
One of the aspects of the relocation of this driveway was because with the signalized intersection, the metro buses are moving to the other side of the intersection, which is where they prefer to stop. But also we're creating a turn lane, and that turn lane is actually preventing, or it's helping by prevention, a lot of the difficult turns which are made into the existing location of where this driveway was. And so, as Jerry was describing, the right out from here will avoid the cross the boulevard exiting, which occurs with the existing driveway location. So it's an improvement in all different aspects of the functioning of the main intersection at 7th, and then all the subsequent driveway access points that are continuing down Gilman Boulevard.
But certainly a large part of it is that flood swale that's being constructed there
Yes.
at the corner that's really pushing the driveway further eastward too. Number 3 was flooding. That's always been a big issue, and it was with the River and Streams Board meetings, and they had 2 of those. The site is 100% in the floodplain today. It's still going to be in the floodplain in the future too, but the buildings will be built up so that they're above the 100-year floodplain. The parking is contained within garages under all 3 buildings, but they will be designed to be flood-proofed. The entrances to those 2 garages, which are on the western side of the site off of where you enter from 7th, that area will be built up, again, above the 100-year flood event elevation. And so that will also keep the water from protruding into those garages. It's my understanding that it's not only for the 100-year flood, but it even survives the 500-year floodplain as well, too. So it's really, they're taking no chances here with that.
Jerry, how often are those floodplain maps updated?
It's periodically. I've seen them done a few times. Usually it's been done more for amendments when there's been a request. I've seen it done at the Raleigh properties. I haven't seen them done for several years now, though.
Obviously, there's been significant discussion at all levels lately
Yeah,
about
probably the
changing
last
weather
time
patterns.
this was done was after the creek was widened. There were a lot of improvements made after the 1996 flood. The creek was widened, and I think at that time we saw some improvements with FEMA. So, that's been about 10 years, over 10 years. Yeah, if I do my math right, like 15 or so, almost. When the site does flood, obviously the big swale will take the hit of it because it's designed to take the water. And there were a number of comments about, well, what happens to the plants? Well, if plants are destroyed, they have to be replaced and fixed. Mud has to be cleaned up. We have a requirement that's been always in our landscape code that for forever you take care of your plant materials. And this goes beyond the 3-year maintenance bonding that we require for maintenance of plants. So it's going to be forever that we want to see those taken care of. There was a number of questions too, that what about the residents that live in these buildings? And we do a pretty good job, the city does, on Channel 21 and putting out notices when there's floods and what stage the waters are. We'll want to see some pamphlets and some legal information given to the residents that they're aware that they're living in a floodplain type zone too. It seems to be reasonable. I believe you've agreed to that.
Correct.
For the future. The shared use route.
Jerry?
Yes.
Do you want to give them a chance to add, the applicant, to add anything
Oh,
about
do you want to add
flooding?
anything further? I know you've agreed to it.
No, we
but-
totally agree with what the staff has responded to here.
Yeah. The shared use route is one of the main elements of the central Issaquah plan, runs through our valley. A good part of this runs east-west in the site, and a portion of it runs also north-south up to Gilman Boulevard. The portion that runs southeast is the awkward part because it falls within a kind of an undeeded street area that's now served by the dental office, and it's also served by the daycare facility the preschool that's there at the corner too. And so what makes it tough is you got the pavement for the shared use route, plus the 2 feet of landscaping that's required on the 2 sides, and that's just not able to be accomplished within that section. There will be an adjustment of standards that will be required for us to look at, and looking to see what is going to be the best solution for it, because we really want to put the emphasis on pedestrians first over the vehicles. And there's some ideas that's been explored already, whether it's grasscrete or even cobbles on the side, something to identify motorists that, hey, this is a special trail. Drive slowly through here too. The applicants even suggested a possibility of dedicating that land to the city. I don't know what if the city wants it or not, but anyway, the offer's been made.
Well, this strip of land is not the width of a regular street. And by the time we have been required to dedicate the portion which is being used by the shared use trail, that's almost 50% of the width. And so Lennar has just been considering that they would, if they were left with just this even skinnier strip of land coming down there, which the two adjoining property owners are using for their parking and for the access to the daycare, it seems more appropriate to dedicate the full width of that rather than just half of it. And we've had a number of discussions with staff about resolving the detailing of potentially adding bollards at the end of the shared use trails so that pedestrians and bicycles know they're entering a different area that's going to see vehicles, and then working with the staff to work out exactly what the ground surface details are. And we're all in agreement that we'll do that as part of the conditioning of the project.
The diagram shows the area that we're speaking about. The dental office is located right here on the right side to the east. They use that space for backing up. They have 90-degree parking. The children's play area, which is, I think, kind of a preschool, is over here on the west side, and they use that for access coming in. And with the shared route at 10 feet wide, plus 2 and 2 feet of landscaping, 14 feet, it's just impossible to accommodate everybody well here in the space.
Yeah. So we are all in agreement.
Number 5 was the Building C courtyard. That's the courtyard that faces in a northerly direction. These courtyards are semi-private, but they're also available to the public, I guess, too, because the trails run right by them. What was shown was a connection here on the western side that leads to the shared use route. That's the heavier line. We feel that users within this space here, it's kind of a bermed space on the sides and the top, so it kind of creates some privacy there. But those that will be wanting to go to Gilman Boulevard or to the dog park, the new neighborhood park that's being provided, Gilman Boulevard, would probably not necessarily take the route to the west, but may take a shortcut on the eastern side, which is more direct. I know the applicant wants to keep the main trail, which is 6 feet wide, here on the west side, and if this becomes an issue, we can certainly still work it out. Perhaps there could be some stepping stones or something of that nature added into it. But we'll have to evaluate the courtyard and see if that becomes a problem.
Yeah, we don't believe that the single route is a problem. And that if people are going out to a shared use trail, they're more than likely going out for exercise purposes or taking their dog for a walk, and that the shortest route is not necessarily the foremost thing in their mind. But you'll see in the solar diagrams, one of the aspects of placing the outdoor seating area in this location is to move it as far north as possible to get it out of the shadow of the buildings. And so we're just thinking of this as being an area that has a little more privacy to sit outside than going across the street and sitting in the park, where you're in just a much more public environment. So we have a slight disagreement
We
here,
do. At
but
the same time, Chapter 2 also calls for these connections to be direct and friendly towards pedestrians, too. So that's the challenge.
Mr. Chair, just a question/comment maybe. So this, still getting comfortable with the process, and the level of detail we're operating at now is not as granular as it was in the previous process. And so when we get into situations like this, you know, we don't have really enough information to say, well, do something like the following to create that secondary but not as formal a connection, et cetera. And so I'm hearing a debate between the applicant and the staff on what we should do. I think where the commission was, I'm just trying to figure out how do we continue to emphasize the need to really explore or create what could be a future alternative that provides kind of protection from trampling of this landscaping that will happen if people decide they want to go to take the shortcut and they're just going to plow through?
I think we've actually come to a good agreement about this. You can see that there's a slight difference of opinion. And we've come to an agreement about this, that as we go through the construction of this, the shortcut path is something that we do agree is not necessarily built to the same standards as the 6-foot wide
And I would agree with that.
handicapped accessible path that is running around, because that is why that is on the longer side, because we couldn't get an accessible route on the other side. But the potential that we could incorporate a stepping stone kind of path through the landscaping there, as we all get to look at how it's shaping up, we think can be a solution.
Yeah,
to
and I
this.
would agree with that. I think 2 formal paths is overkill. I think that kind of secondary path being something simple integrated into the landscaping, but it's not walking on top of the.
And we've done something similar already on this property too. The shared use route, which runs north and south towards the creek, there's also a path there too that's a pervious type trail too.
Yeah.
More gravel too. So that's kind of a minor trail.
But I guess back to the question process question, and so since we don't have the level of detail that says, a specific condition thou shalt do the following, because it may not be the right answer to make it a requirement right now because we don't have enough, we haven't explored it further enough. How do we ensure that, other than this conversation, that this actually happens, that we really do fully explore it, and in the end of the day, what seems to be the preference is kind of a main accessible pathway that meets those criteria, those code requirements, and then this kind of secondary, if it makes sense in the end in the design, the secondary informal connection to the trail.
So-
Instead of doing a condition, is part of the conversation on the record enough to make
Well,
the point?
You're bringing up an excellent point, and I mean, depending on the commission's level of comfort too. I think what we were proposing is that because we've captured this option in the memo, and the staff have described it, the applicant has described it, we've concurred that having this as an option moving forward, we think is a good way to evaluate it. We feel that having that in our document, which is part of the basis of the decision, is sufficient. However, if the commission feels more comfortable, having a condition drafted that during the construction phase, that staff and applicant will evaluate on site the need for this sort of secondary stepping stone path, we could, I'd be glad to draft that while we're reviewing this evening.
Great, I appreciate that. And then just more clarity on this point. So there were, in the memo, in the staff applicant memo, there on the floodplain issues and the impacts there were, comments made about, and they were responsive to the commission's concerns last time about providing notification or information to the residents about potentials for flooding, even though the garage is flood-proof as defined in the memo, they could still be trapped as a result of flooding that happens on the site. And so the awareness thing, and so the memo talks about that, but there are no formal conditions that were created as part of the original recommendation and or here within additional staff recommended conditions. And so again, it's in the memo, but it's not formalized as a condition. There was also comments about creating a legal obligation to do that, which gets a little bit sensitive when you start talking about that. And so, again, I'm still trying to get clear in my mind about the weight that comes with if it's in the memo versus it's a formal condition that has been defined by and adopted by the commission, and the standing of those as far as implementation.
So if this had, so I'm going to go take a big step back. If at the time, before we issued the first staff report, we had identified that we thought that it was necessary, for instance, to put the signage up in the garage, which is something we've talked about and the applicants concurred with. We wouldn't have probably made that a condition of the staff report, we would have made it a construction condition. And part of the distinction that we're seeing there is that the land use conditions are things that sort of have site-wide impacts, their implementation of zoning, that are really at a land use level. But there are a lot of things, like, for instance, the signs in the garage, that are important to capture, to make sure that the applicant is aware of them, that staff doesn't forget about them. I mean, it sort of serves as a tickler list, so to speak. And so that's part of why we've gone to the construction condition as a sort of secondary attachment of conditions to the staff report, because we think that level of there's a lot of good ideas that come up as we work with the applicant, and we want to make sure those are captured to facilitate moving into the next phase. So I say all of that because the thing that strikes me is that, for instance, the signage in the garage would probably be more appropriate as a construction condition. It doesn't have site-wide impacts, but we certainly don't want to lose track of it.
Right.
I guess our thought is that many of the things that are in the briefing response memo are the kind, it almost becomes another list that we turn to because of the level of detail.
Right.
But this is a relatively new thing for all of us as well. We developed that in the fall as we were combining and refining our processes as a result of the Kaizen process that Christopher Wright described. So as you asked, I say all of this because we're still sort of figuring out where things should be, where conditions should be, what should be conditions. And so I think it's important that if the commission feels that these really need to be captured in conditions rather than relying on the staff report as they continue. I mean, I'm happy to draft some language
Great.
that we can add to the motion.
Yeah. So that's really helpful, and I appreciate the audience patience with this as we're still finding our way a bit here and want to make sure we're doing this well. So I guess the way I'll characterize this is, in my mind, that when it comes to the official conditions of permit approval, that those are essentially, these are mandatory, that we want to make sure that in this form this happens. Things that are captured in the response memo that are responsive to the concerns or questions of the commission, they're still flexible. They're important to be addressed by staff and the applicant as in the design team as you go through construction. We don't have enough detail to be fixed on an outcome that we want, but it is an issue we want to see addressed in the continuation of design development. And that's the way I'll kind of separate them in my mind. But if it's something we absolutely want to see happen, and we're gonna write a condition that goes as a permit condition.
I just wanted to point out that from the previous meeting, we've been working with staff. We've jointly responded to the issues and concerns of the commission and the public. And although this seems like a small thing to be having a disagreement over, the applicant has agreed that as the spaces are created and the topography of the courtyard is in place and the distances are seen, that we're saying that at that point in time, if it is obvious that this shortcut stepping stone path is the right thing to do, the applicant is agreeing that it will be done.
Right.
That we're just, voicing at this time that we don't necessarily feel it's necessary, but we are keeping an open mind and are committing to working with staff, both in the planning department and in our building permit applications, that this is a potential to be viewed as a group further down the road as we're getting closer to the final construction of the spaces.
I think it's a good example for testing this, theory back and forth a bit. Again, keeping in mind that the design development hasn't progressed as far along as we have traditionally had in front of us, so we could be a little more specific in what we wanted to see happen. And we don't want to do something that becomes a requirement that eventually doesn't make sense as the design develops, and then you're stuck.
Yeah.
So we don't want to create that outcome either. So that flexibility is important. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
So to that end, since we're testing things, I'm going to try drafting a couple of conditions. I'll go over and show them to the applicant, then we can talk to you as we're getting to a point where the commission's ready to make a decision.
Number 6 was, what is the purpose of the courtyards? Are they primarily for public use or the residents, or a combination of both? And the courtyards are semi-private. There's 3 main courtyards. You can see the little black and white drawings on the lower right, and they're by our shared use routes for the most part, or along 7th. Our plan does require that to provide a number of public type spaces, individual spaces, which are decks and balconies. You'll see we saw those already with the buildings, and there's some lower ones as well. There's some common and private ones, such as the courtyards, which we see here, and there's also some private spaces within the recreation facilities within each of those buildings too, those are totally private spaces too. These are kind of a little bit semi-private, but designed to be more private, I believe. And that also includes the route between buildings B and C. Part of the purpose of these public uses also includes the neighborhood park. And I took this snippet from your last presentation too, which was in color, and that shows the park, which is just west of Issaquah Creek. So I think they're providing the amenities.
Jerry, I have a question on that.
Sure.
How does a member of the public, how will they know what's public and what's private?
Well, there is a separation of a landscape buffer between the trail and the courtyard, so that will do it. On 7th Avenue, the courtyard is actually built up, elevated above the street sidewalk. There's stairs.
Well, I'm thinking that we're
I don't
obviously...
think they have any signage proposed saying private keep out.
Well,
Well, could I,
that's my point. I mean,
Yeah.
what I'm thinking is that the city is trying to encourage pedestrian traffic.
We are.
And if you succeed, there are going to be people who are going to get tired at a certain point and want to sit down, and there are going to be others that are going to want to go to sleep. And, there is a percentage of the population there. So if I would assume that residents are going to expect there to be a rational person to be able to define what's private and what's public. And it's not clear to me that landscaping is going to do it.
maybe
Because then you're going to get into people calling the police and saying there's some guy sleeping in our courtyard.
Or maybe I could talk to the bigger issue of public access in multifamily housing developments. I think you're aware that the only piece of this site which is being deeded to the city is the shared use trail running through there. The rest of this is private property. What happens with private property is there is a standard of behavior which is expected of people who are using private property, even though it appears to be completely open to the public. And that is one of the measures that allows the people managing this property to make the decision that mischief is happening, and this is not within the standard of behavior which is appropriate on private property. And there will be, somewhere on this site, there will be signs posted that says there is a standard of behavior expected because you are on private property. And this is not the same as a public street, and it's not the same as a public park. And so that is underwritten there. Now, a lot of people recognize that that can have a positive influence in terms of the policing of a space like this, because if some mischief is happening just in a public right-of-way, who is going to call the police to say that something nasty is going on? When a private property owner says there is something nasty happening on my piece of property, we need your assistance, that typically is found to get a greater response. And so it's a little complicated, but the standard of behavior for public on private property is a known aspect of providing this kind of across the whole site access. So it's something that will be worked out, and language will be worked out later, and I'm sure we'll be able to share it with the city.
Yeah, but these spaces, they are geared and oriented towards the residents themselves.
That's
so.
correct.
And I think part of what you're hearing is that while there may be some signage to further inform people who are coming to the site, that a lot of it is, nonverbal communication that is used in the design to be more inviting in the park space and maybe less inviting in certain courtyards that are intended for residents. And, those things sometimes evolve as you see how a site is used, because the intent is that the park site would be available generally for the public.
And we actually have designed the free courtyards to have different levels of containment on Building A, which is, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
oops, no,
can you- let's see.
right, okay.
Here's-
On Building A, the access to this courtyard, which is on the east side of the building, is only through the building. There is no, unless you scaled the wall coming out of the swale, there's no public access to that courtyard. The courtyard in Building B, which opens off of
Off of 7th.
7th, actually does have a 3-foot high fence with a gate. And so it's, the intention there is that the space and the landscaping are sort of being contributed to the public realm. But there is clearly a point where you would know you're entering something which is semi-private. And then Building C courtyard is the most open of all of those courtyards, because that is where guests and residents actually just walk through that courtyard in a very traditional courtyard apartment approach to a building, where you're walking through that space to get to the lobby. And again, depending on how the resident was wanting to feel, the resident has access to all of these different spaces. And so we're incorporating, and of course you get across the street to the park, it's fully open to the public.
I would imagine the management of the apartment complex will have to monitor this as well, too.
Yes.
So. Oh, the management will have to monitor behavior in these spaces, too. Seven really came through this through block passage. I think the question was, if I can read it here. With all three buildings being 5 stories in height, will there be enough sunlight for the plantings proposed? The public-private space with the primary through-block passage between buildings B and C may be dark and mossy due to the 5-story heights of the adjacent buildings. The space is about 40 to 50 feet wide, and it also has a very good southern exposure too, which is very much to its advantage. So certainly during the noon hours of the day, it'll receive the maximum sunshine, and we did ask the applicant to provide some solar studies on this too, and we have some of those too, which will show at the spring, is it the equinox, I guess, as well as the peak of the summer on June 20th.
I'll do that now.
I will, this is March 21st,
Okay.
the day we just passed.
Yeah.
And so this is taken at 10 a.m. in the morning.
So what we've done is we've looked at the solar shading for every hour through the day, starting at 10 and going till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And as designers, we're not just looking at what sunlight is falling on the ground, which if you actually look at the through block passageway, the ground is in shade at 10 o'clock. But the key thing here is that the east face of Building B is pretty much completely in sunlight and therefore is reflecting light into the space. So as we go through these and we move an hour, you can just see, and this is also applying to the courtyard that we're just looking at. You can start to see how the sun is getting different access to different parts of the courtyards. So at different times of the day, there are going to be places where a resident could predict where the sun is going to be. And then when we look at
One right next to it.
in the summer, you can see it by 10 o'clock in the morning. We actually have sunlight falling on the through block passageway on the ground, and obviously as well shining on the building facade. And this is running through on an hourly basis. You can see part of what I was talking about with the sort of use of this space as a sitting area, and then the other two courtyards. As we're going through the day, obviously at noon we're getting light all the way down the through block passageway, and then it starts to move over in the afternoon until we're 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see it's starting to get shadier again.
The main emphasis was that through block passage between buildings B and C. Certainly building A will get the most morning light and building B will get the best of the afternoon light too.
Yes.
The plants are kept fairly low between buildings B and C, so they're not going to be casting a great amount of shade. There's also a lot of lights that will be strung between the buildings too, to also further lighten it up too during those darker sessions as well too.
Yeah.
There's an example in Seattle that we included in your briefing report, and that's with an alley in Seattle. It's near the REI store, and so you can kind of see an example in Seattle of a similar type passage, although there's a little bit more narrow, and even with that, there's quite a bit of light. That one also has a southern exposure, as does this one here. 8 was having to do with mixed uses. The question was, why isn't this a mixed-use building consistent with the central Issaquah plan instead of a single-use building? Will there be rental, or retail, I should say, in the future? Where will the residents work? Will there be, where will the displaced businesses go? And Darlene, you're here. I know you've brought that up yourself, I think, that particular question. Okay. Mixed use is not a requirement of this plan. It's certainly something, or this plan, it's something we certainly encourage, but it's not a requirement. They could have gone all retail, they could have gone all residential, and they chose to go all residential. Again, as we discussed earlier, they still have to provide an option to this building for changes in the future, which you saw earlier with Building B with the taller lobby and the dwelling units above it taken out. So there is an opportunity for future commercial within that space as it goes over time. We don't know where the residents will work. They could work anywhere in the city or outside of the city, but there certainly is a lot of retail and offices within the central Issaquah plan of over 1,000 acres that accommodates workspaces for a variety of workers of all levels.
Have you done, has the applicant done demographic studies or market studies of the desired customers, residents?
You want to talk, Tom, about that?
Yeah, I think Tom Bartholomew with the applicant, with Lennar. We see the target market, I think, as being composed of young families. It could be even single parents, small families, in part because the schools are so good and so close by. The elementary school is so close by. In terms of where people will work, which I guess is the real question, The other thing that attracted to us, to this property was the walkability, that such a high walk score in a suburban location is pretty unusual, and also the great access to transit. So right outside the door, both going and coming, there's express bus service to downtown Seattle, Bellevue, and Redmond. So I think I think the answer is anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
You brought up another issue that I still am not clear on, and I've asked this question in a number of meetings with a number of different applications. You mentioned small families, single-parent families. What is the process? I still don't, it's not clear to me what and this is for the staff.
Okay.
It's still not clear to me what the process is to communicate, what process, if any. How does the school board, doing their responsibility, become aware of increases in the population, the number of kids in the community for their planning purposes? What is that process?
We actually have that here in the report, too. That was item number.
Well, I'll
25.
Item 25,
If it's addressed in the report, I didn't see it.
Number 25.
Number 25, and we're going to get
25?
to that one, too.
All right, then we can just
Because we
wait.
certainly work with the school district on our comprehensive plan, too, and the densities that we expect to.
Well, and I think the easiest way that they find out is for those residential units, they get impact fees. So that's one way that they know that things are being built. They also have demographers that, are projecting based on births and trends of people moving and building permits, how many people they expect to be in the schools and where they'll be living and what the ages of the children will be. And we work with the school district. It's predominantly their decision, but we work with them on locating school sites if necessary, or and collecting the school impact fees.
And it's
for
kind of interesting with the impact fees, because many years we collected for the school district impact fees for single family only. We weren't collecting for, school district did not require an impact fee for multifamily. And so that's just recently, within the last couple of years, that we are now assessing multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
Just another quick question on that. Did you do any kind of estimate of accounting for a vacancy rate, the number of people that would be residing in Atlas at any one time, and then like a range of school-age children associated with that?
As the architect, I'm going to pass that over to the developer. You were looking at me. That's why.
It's a quick answer, no, not to that level
Okay.
of detail.
And I think the way the city would look at it is the way a building like, we often have applicants that come in and say, we won't have children, or we're going to have tons of children, or, they know the market that they think is going to be attracted to the types of housing that they're building. And it is somewhat different with a rental project, because if they're owning it, they recognize what I'm about to say. But, with townhouses, single-family homes, and other kinds of condo projects, we're trying to think about who's moving in now, but also, how it may need to be used in 10, 20, 30 years. And so it's kind of a balancing act between the requirements that we have now and setting it up for some flexibility long-term over the total life of the building.
So I know this is going to be, I know it's addressed in number 25, but what I'm hearing is that there really isn't one of the last developments, applications that we looked at, I think it was even last year, was an apartment complex on Newport, right where 7th and Newport intersect. And as I recall, it's a rather large structure with lots of units, and it's basically across the street from Issaquah Elementary School. And I asked then, does the school board know that they're going to be? So what I'm hearing is that there really isn't a formal process of saying 343 rental units are going to be constructed at this site, and the statistics are that X percent of those will have school-aged children. There's no formal, it's like the rental or the impact fee goes into the account, and then they do their thing to extrapolate from that.
And I would say yes, that's right, and that is really important that they're doing that extrapolation, because they really are, they have all the statistics. And, you know, while you're right, we could provide census and other kinds of information, you know, their level of knowledge of who moves in where and the implications of that for specific to not only the Issaquah School District, but the individual schools is going to be superior to anybody else's, just because that's what they spend, you know, all their time doing.
I'm not suggesting that it's the city's responsibility or the DC's responsibility to do that, but it just seems to me that making sure that knowledge that there are 343 rental units going in at this site, we're considering an application for another 250, 100 yards away, that they get that to do their thing with it, and it is their responsibility. But, you know, all of us are concerned about quality of life for residents in Issaquah. I mean, that's basically what this is all about.
Yeah, they typically don't get a notice of application, and an application comes in saying, this is how large it is, this is how many units it is. In this case, they're studios, 1s, and 2 bedrooms, so they're not really large family-type units.
But I think that the point both of you are making that's so important is I don't think the school district is as interested in land use permits, because land use permits are not a guarantee that that actually is going to happen. And so I think that their interest is in the actual issuance of a building permit, which is when we collect the school impact fee and when it would be passed to them. And, you know, with most of the projects that they're really going to care about, there's usually at least a year of construction that takes place. So at the point that permit's issued, there's probably a year before anyone's going to be present that might be generating school-age children. And that, while not enough time to build a school, is enough time to begin to consider how things, you know, those shifts, because it usually is several years before they have, you know, the impacts are sufficient enough that they are making significant changes.
That timing can be very long-term too. It's not always just a year or two. Calcari condominiums, for instance, is an example as a master site plan, and that's 15 years later, and they're still not built out yet.
I think something that I want to add too is that these units are relatively small, say compared to the units that are up on the plateau in the highlands. And so kids who are in these units likely are going to be younger and quite possibly preschool age. These units are not intended for small families per se.
The bus stop is being moved eastward. I think we heard that earlier. With the last presentation, there was a discussion from the applicant about gravel surfacing being placed out there, which the city doesn't allow. We don't want the gravel flying out into the street, into the right-of-way, and nicking vehicles out there either. So it will have to be a hard surface of some type of material.
We're just working with the city to arrive at the right permeable material so that we are able to keep the trees that are going to be lining Gilman on the regular tree spacing, but make sure that the ones close to the bus stop get plenty of water. So we're working together on the solution.
Yeah, I mean, irrigation can work this out, pervious pavement too, so there's different solutions that can work to make this effective with the landscaping. Signage was a question. This is a new illustration too. This is at the corner of 7th and Gilman. It has the new name too on it, Atlas. And this is one of these street walls. It has varied heights, but this is an option that has been presented by the applicant. We rather like it too, how it fits into the space. Architecturally, it looks really nice. And we'll be talking about this corner a little bit more too in this briefing report as well. We don't have any sign permit applications yet. Number 11 does relate to what we just saw, and that is that there is a build-to-line presence required, getting the buildings within 0 to 10 feet of your streets. We see that being provided for buildings B and C on 7th and Locust, and for part of it for building A along 7th also. But with Gilman Boulevard, that's a little bit unique because of the drainage flood swell that runs east and west through that portion of the site, so it doesn't quite meet it. We'll take an adjustment of standards to deviate from that standard, but we are going to want to see some vertical elements within this area. The Central Issaquah plan does talk about vertical architectural elements running 60 feet in each direction of the street, and that's what they've shown here in this newer drawing. There's some openings too, which is fine. There's some walls, there's landscaping, there's some seating, there's some pedestrian lights too to bring in some vertical elements of that too.
Let's see, how do I get the,
Quick question, just to make sure I've got the design. So the bench faces
The
with this-
bench faces inward in towards
the
the
green into the swale.
drainage swell,
And the
yes.
concrete wall provides
Go to
kind of
the-
shielding from the roadway.
The
then.
detail of it.
yes.
'Cause-
Well, we've got some more drawings. Which
Okay,
will,
because the other way, facing the street would not be very,
yeah.
And here we have,
Yeah, what we have here is that we have created, we've adjusted actually, from the last time you saw this, we've adjusted all the spacing running through here. It's a little complicated, but we're trying to make sure that the buses aren't the active pruning of the trees. So we're pulling the trees in and we're creating a slightly wider planting area adjacent to the boulevard than is required in order to let the trees, the location of the trees be further away because this is where the buses are swooping in to come to the bus stop. We are proposing that there was only a couple of the hazelnut trees that were a healthy enough state to keep, but we are now proposing that we actually take those couple out as well as the unhealthy ones.
and they've been taken away already on the western side of 7th by
Yes.
the city. They weren't healthy trees. They've been replaced with newer trees since.
So by the time we make an alley of the trees on each side of the sidewalk, the second row of trees is basically falling on the property line. The other thing that we're dealing with here is that we actually do have a gas line, which we are sleeving past the trees, but it is running on the edge of the planting area, so it's not falling underneath the sidewalk, so we don't rip up the sidewalk if the city rip up the sidewalk if there's any need for repair to that. And so what we're creating is a series of walls which are parallel. They're spaced about 18 inches away from the back of the sidewalk. It's our intention that the concrete wall facing the road actually will become a green wall. It'll be planted so that it will get covered in vines. But the side of the wall which is facing the swale gets a bench and then a pedestrian pole light at each one of those. So that is, in scale, these are on the side of this wall where the hand is 4 feet tall and going up to 5 feet tall. So each one has got, now this is picking up the sloping top, which is on the top of the buildings as well.
right.
And that gets to the corner and it runs up so that the wall here is 5 feet and then back down. And then we're repeating the same element coming down 7th. We're actually using the required spacing of the trees, the 30-foot spacing of the trees, to actually say where these walls and benches should go, so they're in the middle of the tree spacing. And they're also spaced far enough away that we're not interfering with the roots of the new trees that we're going to be planting adjacent to these areas.
There's
We al-
also the issue of safety and security too,
Yes.
with the benches. I think that needs to be brought.
And that was one of the reasons why we actually have a pedestrian scale pole light at each one of these areas. And we didn't want people to be able to sort of walk along the sidewalk and hit people sitting on the benches on the back of their heads. And so we were looking at this as a complete element. We get a bench here too, so these 5 benches here are all focused in towards the swale area.
Yeah, and just as far as the wall height that you were talking about, 4 to 6 or 4 to 5 feet tall, which I think is good because I'm guessing, I don't know if police looks at these things, but from a public safety standpoint, you want to create places where people can hide and
Yeah.
surprise people, et cetera, particularly walking along here at night. So the design actually seems to find a balance to create something interesting, but also doesn't appear to create any sort of a security problem.
We were concerned about them getting too tall. I mean, we understood the notion that we're trying to replicate a building, a built-to line for a building. But we feel like we've reached a happy medium here, that we're getting something that can be substantial enough that there's the series of walls, but that we're not running foul of the safety issues.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just ask a really basic question. Can you tell me again what the purpose of the walls behind the benches or in front of the benches, is the case, what the fundamental purpose is?
The fundamental purpose, and I'm saying this without any implied irony, is that the Central Issaquah Plan has a requirement for buildings to be built within 0 and
10
10
feet.
feet of any property line. We're not able to build any buildings within that area because of the existing drainage pattern,
Right.
which runs all the way down, you can see it all the way down Gilman Boulevard. That's where the swale runs all the way along the street. And so that is the destination of all the stormwater, is connecting into that existing swale running through there. So that's our connection to the existing stormwater system that the city has in place. What we've been doing here is arriving at a solution which, in a creative way, is meeting the intent of getting a definition of a build-to line without having to build a building at the build-to line. So we're creating this series of walls, and let's just go back to the next slide. We're creating a series of walls, which are running along here. We're actually going, from the corner down here, we're actually running about 72 feet rather than the 60 feet that the city has in the plan. But we are spacing these out so that we're getting a combination of walls, trees, landscaping, seating areas, and it's a little subtle here, but a change in the paving pattern running through this area, all to work together to satisfy the fact that we need an adjustment to the fact that we can't meet the build-to requirement.
Can I address that as well? I'll just address it by saying that we asked the same question about the importance of that wall. We were skeptical as well. We understand that it's in the plan, but we were skeptical about the
Well, actually, I
requirement
was, yeah, I don't want to, so my understanding is that there is no aesthetic, that this is a code compliance requirement that you are attempting to address, but it has no fundamental security benefit. It has no fundamental aesthetic benefit. I mean, you're putting vines on it to make it look less like a wall.
We are
But I guess and we're going to discuss this later, but well, all right, we'll discuss it later.
Well, we're trying to satisfy a city requirement in an aesthetically pleasing and safe, with an aesthetically pleasing and safe solution. And we have been working with the city staff on this for about 6 months now to arrive at what the intention of this regulation is and how we might arrive at a compromise as to what
Okay.
we should do.
But it would be the
Okay,
substitute
so let-
alternative, having the street wall versus a building there, which is not
Yes.
practical.
Well, Jerry, let me ask
Okay.
the city this then. Is it the city's contention that these 4 to 5 foot high concrete walls behind these benches is desirable, or is it required? And it's not just a question of semantics here.
I think it's a little bit more desired. It's not the only solution. We gave, we provided with the last staff report several different photos. I think we provided 4 photos of different types of examples of how this could be achieved. Since they can't get the building up front, the street wall, what could be done? And there were some artistic things that were done. This was a proposal by the architect of what they're trying to share with us of how they think they can meet it.
So what would be the consequence of not having those walls, having the benches, but not having the walls? What
I don't
would be
think that would
what would be
work.
the negative consequence?
Well, we did want to have some vertical element with it, and benches would not provide it, nor would just landscaping either. It needed something more physical, something that relates to the building itself too.
So we are finding our way through, this is of course our first significant foray through the central Issaquah standards. The standards, as Alan did an excellent job of pointing out, require that buildings be 0 to 10 feet from every property line, no exceptions.
Right.
And there is also another requirement that there be 60 feet of building along from a corner back. So, clearly with the swale there, it is not possible to have a building in that location. So our work with the applicant was to say, what is an alternative that both is because in keeping with the architecture of the building, that, let's say, implies where the street wall would be without building a street wall, and that carries forward the goals of those requirements, which is to create a good urban environment that's comfortable for pedestrians. The particular solution, as Jerry pointed out, is really, it's the applicants. We'll be honest, they would prefer to not be doing this. But I think staff felt that while it is absolutely accurate that a building can't be here, that there are elements that could be provided that respect the standards in the Central Issaquah plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Could I, it seems, if I'm looking at the schematic correctly, it looks like if the code or the Central Issaquah plan requires a 10-foot margin, those walls are 18 feet away, right? If the planning strip is 12 feet and the sidewalk is 6 feet, if my arithmetic's right.
This is the property line right
That's the
here.
property line.
See
every
where this
property
is?
line- Okay, I'm sorry.
It's not back here or back here.
Not to the
It's this
street.
line right here.
Right, got it. I'm sorry.
And-
Thank you.
And the building would need to be either here or 10 feet away over here. And as you can see, we start to get into the shaping of the stormwater swale. I mean, we believe that this will be an attractive place for people to look at. It's being, you saw how nicely it's being landscaped.
Yeah.
It will be turned into an amenity besides being functional for the flood wall.
Jerry, the applicant mentioned that this wall might prevent people sitting on the bench from getting slapped on the head or by skateboarders or whatever, but has the police department looked at this?
No, they have not.
Because if, well, to me, well, I'll save my comments for later. All right, we can go on to the next one.
Number 12, there was concern about contamination of the soils, and with the applicant's presentation in April, they kind of gave some history of the property. I think there was a dry cleaners, was there a gas station there too?
Yes.
But anyway, the soils, particularly on the western side, are contaminated, and they will be required to comply with all applicable codes for the removal and stabilization of those contaminated soils. And it's not only the soils on the site, but also in the buildings when they get demolished too. There could be asbestos, and that would have to be all properly removed and disposed of too.
Speaking of disposal and removal, another hat that I wear is on the Friends of Issaquah Salmon Hatchery, and one of the things that we've learned is that about 85 to 90% of the fecal coliform bacteria in Issaquah Creek comes from dogs, and people not picking up after their dogs. We are going to encourage pedestrian activity here. We have a dog park, so as long as we're talking about contamination and removal, what provisions are going to be made to make it as easy as possible for people to clean up after the dogs, and then who cleans up after the people who clean up after the dogs? Whose responsibility is it?
Well, at the dog park, which is fenced, there will be bags available so that people with the dog can pick up after their dogs, and then there will be a waste bin for those bags to be placed, and then the managers of the total property will be responsible for removing those for disposal.
Other, aside from the dog park, will there be one or two other receptacles on the site for people using the
We
path?
expect that because there's going to be more pedestrian use with the shared use trail running through here, we expect those to be on a regular, basis through the site.
Receptacles, benches, all the pedestrian
The
amenities.
bags.
Transportation concurrency. Traffic was an issue that was brought up, and it was dealt pretty extensively in the SEPA determination. You have that with your original staff report. What will be the impact of new traffic with the number of dwelling units proposed? Does traffic concurrency show no impact from this project? Will the proposed signal be too close to the existing signal? Those are the basic questions, and there will be new traffic generated by this project. They are, however, receiving credit, of course, from the commercial use of the property that's been there today. The traffic study determined that they'll be getting 74 new PM trips. Now, most of the traffic that enters the site today, of course, is off Gilman Boulevard. This traffic, 90% of it would be using 7th Avenue, and about 10% would be using Locust Street. There was an analysis that was done with the 4 nearby street intersections too. The level of service is going to be improving with this project too. At 7th and Gilman, there is a requirement through SEPA that they provide a new traffic signal there, and the channelization lanes that will go along with it too. Some further traffic analysis is still going to be occurring too on left turn movements from 7th into the site. Street improvement projects to the plan's requirements. That's Gilman Boulevard, 7th, and Locust. Those streets are going to be widened, new sidewalks, bicycle ways. Those are all requirements to be put onto those streets. That's going to help the situation too, but there is an increased level of traffic, so we can't hide that point. Did you want to add anything further about traffic? You've given quite a bit of trip generation
I think it was,
information
yeah.
within the applicant's response here too.
The details are all here.
7th Avenue ditch. Is it considered a habitat area? And I think it pretty much is. This is a photograph I took of it. You saw some photographs, even more, that I took at the site the first time around. You can see in the foreground, this is the open ditch, and as you get down to about halfway through the site, the northern part of it's already been placed into a culvert many years ago. And so the remaining part of this ditch here now would also be in a culvert, and amenities, walkways, street improvements, buildings, things that serve the building would be placed in this. In order to convert this into the pipe, then there was also an agreement that they would have to provide mitigation elsewhere on site. You'll see the vast majority of it will be in the new flood channel, and there's a variation, quite a variation of different plants that will be adaptable to the water levels within that area. And then also with the off-channel riparian habitat area that's being proposed along Issaquah Creek itself too. I don't see how much wildlife there is in this particular picture, but I'm sure, I'm sure there's some, you'll see some frogs and other wildlife that would
Okay,
use it
can I
because there is some
ask
standing
members
water.
of the public to hold
Yeah.
their comment until public comment time. I want to make real clear that I understand this ditch. and
This
its
ditch
function.
here.
There will be no, under the proposal, the applicant's proposal, there won't be any runoff from the swale or from the drainage system that goes through the site that you're proposing, over the flooding. It will not go into this ditch. It will go into the area at the intersection of 7th and Gilman, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so the water that goes into this existing ditch now primarily comes from where?
South,
From the south, okay.
yeah.
And drains,
I mean, it's.
and
there's a
drains
It runs in the
to,
northward.
right, to the north.
Pipe
and
down here, it's running up the, it's going in that pipe, and
Right.
it's coming out again, and it's going under 7th.
Okay, and the swale does not have a drainage out of it? It just percolates through the ground? Any flood water that goes in there? Or does it go into this system?
No, the swale, the new swale,
Right,
goes to the existing pipes that go underneath 7th and connect in with the whole stormwater system that runs along Gilman Boulevard.
okay.
This, it's just half of this goes into a pipe, half of it is already in a pipe.
Right.
It's also going in the same direction, and it continues.
I just didn't see in the earlier illustrations of the swale, I didn't see where that activity occurs, any obvious site or sign of where that drainage would occur.
It's actually in that area where the intersection is. Just this pipe comes into that area, and then there's a drain which goes out and across the street.
Yeah, obviously, this is a major concern for a lot of folks, so that understanding how this proposed system is
Yes.
going to handle that water is really key.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're correct here. There's two issues. One is that there is habitat associated with this intermittent class 4
Class 4 stream.
And so there's, that habitat is being recreated in two different places on the site. One at the creek with additional enhancements to the creek than were necessary, and one additional area in the bottom of the swale. The second piece of the puzzle is this south half of this area, where it is the open ditch, is being put in a pipe, but the course of direction is remaining the same, and it's leaving the site in the same way.
Okay.
The square footage of this area that is being lost in the ditch is being fully compensated, square foot per square foot. In fact, it's a little bit larger within these two new areas that are being created. Impervious surface, I think the Development Commission brought that up. We gave the percentages in a table in the staff report. The Central Issaquah plan allows 90% impervious. That's quite a bit larger than the previous 65%, which was allowed by the former R zoning of the site. They'll have about 65%. There's quite a large area within the new neighborhood park. There's Issaquah Creek, the buffers along there, the swale, as well as all this additional landscaping that is occurring within the parking lots along the shared use route. So it's certainly going to be a lot greener. I don't have the exact square footage. We do know it's percentage-wise, it's about 65%. And as we get to the construction phase of it, we'll get those details of how many square feet is pervious versus how much is impervious. 16 was about parking. They are providing approximately 400 parking stalls on the site. That's kind of in the middle between what is required, 339. That's based on whether they're one bedrooms or two bedrooms or studio type units. And then there is a maximum number of parking stalls required now by the Central Issaquah plan. We did not have a maximum under the old code. They would be allowed to have up to 530 spaces. In addition, they have the requirement to provide parallel parking on the streets too as part of the street standards, but they will not get credit for that parking for the apartments. Street parking applies to commercial uses. The average we calculate is about 1.2 stalls per unit. They'll also be providing motorcycle parking and a generous amount of bicycle parking both within the garages and also outside on the site too.
I have a question on the parking.
Oh, okay.
It seemed like I was a little confused on how many units are really being developed. So the number seemed to vary a little. So I guess it's 340 is the number we're using, 344.
345.
And it seemed like in reading through the staff recommendations, and I unfortunately I made copies of what I wanted to say, and I left it. It's on my desk at home, so I can't remember exactly. But it talked about a recommendation of 1.6 stalls per unit was recommended by somebody that was had done some recent studies, but they really thought it was 1.2. And the bottom line for me is it got real confusing on thinking that there was adequate parking. I think that the real fear is that people are going to move off-site to park, especially with parking a retail center right across the street. It's going to be a real attractive nuisance for people that don't want to pay for parking to just go over there and walk across the street. It's not obvious to me that I got confused in reading the documentation of what the real number of the recommendation of stalls per unit ought to be.
Well, the requirement is for your studios, it requires 0.75 per unit, parking stalls. For a one-bedroom unit and a two-bedroom, it's 1 per unit, and that's the minimum requirement. And based on the 346 units, a minimum of 339 parking stalls would be required. Now, as far as the maximum, which is also looked at, your studios, the minimum is 0.75, but the maximum is 1 stall per unit. With a one-bedroom unit, it's 1.25 per unit. That's the maximum. And for your two-bedroom units, it's 2 per unit. In the olden days, before this plan was adopted, it was a minimum of 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. And it didn't matter whether it was a one-bedroom, two-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom, but it's much more restrictive now. in that respect, and putting more emphasis on the bicycles too.
To speak to some of the numbers that you're thinking about, King County has recently undertaken a very detailed study of residential parking in certain areas, which includes some portions of Issaquah, including the site. When you so the 1.6 and 1.2, what they found in that study on average in King County, there was, it says,
And that's on
suburban
page-
King County multifamily projects are built with 1.6 stalls per unit on average, but use only 1.2 stalls. And then, which is about what this project has. The calculator that King County has created has estimated 1.3 stalls per unit as the need, which, if you do count the on-street parking, is the amount of parking the project has. But the important thing, I think, to emphasize is that as long as an applicant is between the minimum and the maximum, it's at their discretion where they choose to fall in that range.
Number 17 is affordable housing required for the project, and no, it's not a requirement for this project. It's not a requirement by the Central Issaquah Plan. If you get into the density bonus program for, say, increased building height, then it comes into play. There may be some studies done in the future about revising our Central Issaquah Plan to require affordable housing. No, that's been thought of, but it's not a requirement today. Fire access and circulation, you asked whether the fire department had looked at the plans, and they've approved it. They have no problems with the way the circulation and the turning radiuses work within the circulation system for the project. And there was a little sample of their fire truck that was on the plans, and it's pretty close to what our fire department has too, similar in size, and it did receive their endorsement. Number 19, will residents have secure access to the buildings? The applicant stated, yes, that they will be allowed, they will be required to have keypads, so for that security, and the city only requires it, by code, we can't require it. The city does not have a section that says you shall put in a security type system with the building, for the entrances, whether it's cameras, special vestibules or locks, key locks, combination types.
The bottom line is that no one will be able to enter the garages or enter the buildings without the appropriate key card, if it's a key card system.
It's just at their choice. And
They've stated that that's what they are going to provide.
Correct.
There is a mid-block crossing with the shared use route here on 7th. It's circled there in the red, and the idea came up, maybe flashing signs could be used to signal the motorists and the pedestrians that it's a safe time to cross. And you've seen this in some cities. It's still being looked at by our city whether it's appropriate or not. There's been mixed feelings about it. We'll be considering this idea as the project goes under review for our construction permits.
Jerry, remind me what the you mentioned this in the last meeting. Remind me what the mixed feelings are, because we've got the one on Newport where the hatchery is, and I think there's at least one other one that I know of. And
Do we have two in the city? I know we have that one by the
what is-
fish hatchery.
so that was my report. There was one discussed at Issaquah Highlands a desire, I can't remember if it was a desire by the commission or exactly where the request had come from. And the police department, so I wasn't aware of the one at the hatchery, so I didn't have that example to give. But there was just a lot of hesitancy about using the those flashing signals that some of the research is beginning to indicate that it creates a false sense of security, and the police department likes to have more consistency through the city in terms of the way they communicate like conditions. And so it's, I think what we want to do is we did not have, honestly, the time to go to the police department at this point. We will, we plan to go and talk to them more about this, but at this point we're just not, we're hesitant to put any kind of condition on requiring this because of some of the comments that we've heard under previous circumstances.
Mid-block crossings are also discouraged too, but sometimes unavoidable too. Tax credits for the project. There are no tax credits for affordable housing with this project. And again, affordable housing is not part of this project, so no tax credits. Herbicides and chemicals, I know there was a concern about whether they'd be used on the site, and they should be restricted. And we do have some rules about them using, about chemicals being used near our creeks and waterways, and that's in our environmental regulations in place. And the applicant has already stated that they will be restricted on the entire site. So not just along the Issaquah Creek area, but the entire site itself. There are some views of our Issaquah Alps there. You can certainly see this picture. It's above the rooftops. That's Tiger Mountain on the left side over here, Squawk Mountain on the right side, and these views will still be maintained. There's a lot of peekaboo views throughout the site, both through the through block passage, through the shared use route. Probably one of the largest areas will be with the new neighborhood park, which will allow these views to continue as well too. Now the applicant is building these heights to the base height, which is 54 feet. They're allowed 54 feet with the underground parking below those buildings. The zoning would allow buildings as high as 85 feet. So that also will help retain these views that were of concern on the site. Building foundations, whether they're on pilings or designed some other way, they are going to have to be designed to meet the International Building Code and have the structural review and engineering review on it too. Applicants already had a professional analysis of the soils on the site too, and feels that their system that they've proposed is acceptable and will work for this project. You want to add anything further, Ellen, on foundation?
Nope.
Impacts to the school district, we kind of got to that a little earlier too, but there is a fee. It's $1,097 per dwelling unit, and generally the school district revises their impact fees each year, usually around December, January. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Number 26 here is in two parts, and it's about condition number 7, and that's for the neighborhood park. It's got a lot of elements with the dog park. It's pretty much of a passive park, but the plan also calls for providing some elements that can be used year-round when it's rainy, like it's been this most of the spring so far. Like a gazebo, for instance. And we'd still like to see something of that proposed with this park. The applicant's been a little bit hesitant towards providing such an element. It's a cost element, cost issue, I suppose. But I think that's something we can still work out with
No, it's a
design too.
It's a design issue.
Design and cost?
It's a design issue.
Okay. Well, we'd like to still work and discuss this further too as we go through our construction permits, see what can and cannot be done for such a structure. Number 8 had to do with the parking, and there's some new language which you see underlined and some language which we took out with condition number 8. This is with the staff report. There were some more pretty stiff penalties. You can see that in the final line. Failure to perform may result in civil penalties, and we've taken that out. We still want to see the parking will be at a cost for the residents. We want to see a reasonable use of those garages at the 85 to 95%. If they're not being used at that 85 to 95%, then perhaps the cost is too high. And we're going to want to see some reports on what is the percentage of these garages being used. If the parking is too high, autos will of course use the lot at Safeway and other abutting properties. We don't want to see that happen. There's only so much limited parking outside the buildings too. So we'd expect to see some monthly reports to see if this is being achieved.
Could it not be a result of people doing what they're being encouraged to do and just using mass transit and not having a vehicle?
That was exactly the applicant's point. I bet he's very happy to hear you say
I was
that.
thinking that same
Well,
thing.
So the point is that there is the ability to adjust depending on the usage, right?
Well, so the condition, this condition had been used in another project in Issaquah, and we just carried it forward.
Yeah.
And in further discussions after the staff report was issued, the applicant pointed out exactly the point. And so instead of making it a required annual element, we ask that as they do studies that they, of parking usage, that they provide it to us. But we also wanted the ability we wanted to be clear with them that if we were seeing Safeway's
Sure.
parking lot filling up with people, or Safeway was complaining, that we needed a mechanism to come back to them and say, we need you to verify that your parking is being used. Partly the reason for the addition of a range was that it might very well be that people are choosing to just give up their cars, or maybe Zipcar or Car2Go comes to Issaquah and you don't need to have a car under those circumstances.
And there may be periods of vacancy with the apartments too. So that adds into it.
Right.
So just to follow up, I'm trying to understand. So is the charge for parking at the discretion of the applicant, or is that a city requirement that there's?
That's at the applicant.
Okay. Yeah, this will be a hard one from an enforcement standpoint, try to figure it out. So I actually appreciate that it's not a bright line here, compliance or non-compliance, but it's still a challenge to try to understand the goal here, that the parking demand for the project should be managed within the project and not spill out elsewhere and cause other
That is the goal.
problems. That's the goal. But the other part of it is, and that was the point that the chair made, is, well, we're trying to encourage people to give up their cars and provide more convenient public transportation to meet their needs, or other alternatives to minimize the amount of, cars on the road kind of a thing and the associated costs. So, anything we can do to accomplish that too. So, and actually paying for parking is one of those mechanisms. So this is a challenging issue. I understand what you're trying to get to. I think the amendments.
Well, and I think to add to those excellent points, a reasonable property owner is going to want to set the rates at a level at which
It's attractive.
is attractive.
Right.
I think our concern is an unreasonable property owner, not that we have any concerns about that at this time, but over the life of a project, we just wanted the ability to begin a conversation if it does not appear that the rates are set at a level that's successful.
Just a follow-up question on this is for staff, and it related is, does the city require transportation management plans that they're submitted for larger projects, or have you contemplated that where, things are done to create incentives for people to actually take mass transit, kind of minimize the demand for vehicles, et cetera. And then you're kind of looking at, and it's through education, it's through providing reduced cost bus passes or things like that. I don't know if that's something that.
I have not seen that in the central Issaquah plan. The main code has that element in it. For instance, some projects do shared parking between uses, between
Right.
peak hours. And we saw that for the Marriott Hotel with the Maple Street building, for instance, too, as one. And we've seen it for the cinema over at Pickering Place, too, where we've had traffic, these plans that you're referring to.
Yeah, okay.
So a transportation management plan is generated through state law. I mean, we do have it in the city code, and it just applies to non-residential projects over a certain size. So, you know, from a requirement perspective, that's where that's triggered. But the city does actively work with property owners to encourage exactly the kinds of programs. And so there's an outreach program. I'm not sure whether it's residential or just non-residential, but there's definitely the Office of Sustainability is very open to working with all property owners who are interested.
Thank you.
I guess I'm a little concerned that the proposed revisions doesn't accomplish the goal, and I guess for me that it's a bit nebulous to know what time to time is, and so I think that any fee for the parking is going to put some people in the adjacent parking lots, and so and it doesn't seem like the language allows adjustment in the rate if in fact the optimistic conclusion is that people don't use their car, they don't even have cars, so they can't fill it. The owner has to lower the rate to where it's free, and they're still not going to use it 'cause they can't meet that requirement. You know, they can't. It says that the property owner must adjust the rental charge monthly until such time as a minimum use rate of 85 to 95% is achieved. Well, if 20% of the people have cars, they can't get there. So the language doesn't allow you to comply with the 85 to 95% if I'm understanding that correctly, right? So, and it would seem that there would be more value in my mind to require some kind of effective analysis that makes decisions on the number of people that have cars and the number of people that are using that facility, and have that be reflected in the percentage of use. Right? If there's 340 apartments and 40 people don't have cars, you're not going to get, you're not, does that make sense? Is what I'm saying make sense?
Well, and in reality, not all the parking, I believe that at least currently, only the parking under the building has a fee associated with it, that the surface parking between the buildings that kind of winds through the project is free. So that's a factor as well. Let me ponder.
You know, some families will have 2 cars apiece. Shame. Yes, I know.
If you finished talking about the parking, I just wanted to go back because I just commented that the gazebo in the park was a design issue. It's actually bigger than just a design issue. It's a design issue, it's a management issue, it's a security issue. We're anxious not to provide a shelter in the park which becomes a dry hangout for anybody, whether it's the people dining in the adjacent restaurants to come and sit in the park and leave their litter behind, or whether it's a smoking shelter or whatever it is. We're just concerned that it has the potential to become an attractive nuisance that needs to be extensively managed rather than having any real purpose. People in this part of the world know that it rains all the time, and walking in the rain is part of the outdoor lifestyle. And to actually have to go across the street and sit under a shelter doesn't seem to fit with our vision of that as an outdoor space.
I would comment that I believe especially your focus on security, as far as I'm concerned, is very legitimate. Because in Issaquah recently, we have had well-publicized incidences of increasing incidents of folks using facilities such as the shelter at the hatchery for cover at night, for not only from the rain, but for cover for illegal activities. And there has been a recent violent activity at the hatchery that has required additional patrols from the police department. It has required the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, which owns the hatchery, to have an enforcement officer that now routinely goes by there. The point of this is like the old squeezing the toothpaste thing. If you have people that are inclined to do that kind of thing, and you run them out of one area, they're going to go to another area. So I think that's a very legitimate concern, to have an isolated, relatively isolated, as far as the view is concerned, site that is going to have a facility like that. Unfortunately, I wish this weren't the case, but I think that security is a real legitimate concern.
So what staff has communicated to the applicant is that we are willing to have a conversation about an adjustment of standards. The standard is really clear. They've brought up concerns, and we're willing to have that conversation, but had not gotten through that process at this time.
Yeah, once again, I think this is another area where consulting with the police department would be real helpful, because they're the ones ultimately, if there is a problem, that they're going to have to deal with it, and I bet they have an opinion on what works and what doesn't in terms of attracting or discouraging that particular clientele.
Yeah, and this neighborhood park won't cover everything anyway. The plan calls for a 2-acre park. This does not have 2 acres. In fact, the plan that we showed a couple weeks back, extends it up both on the north side of Gilman Boulevard and the park, even going further south of Locust. So there'll be other elements to this neighborhood park that stretches beyond this piece of property. And so there could be some other opportunities for some covered elements even within those phases. Those were the questions that were asked of our commission members. The next steps would be preparing findings of fact and have them signed, and then issuing a notice of decision. A notice of decision would be given to the applicant team as well as to all the parties of record that we have on file, and there would be an appeal period established on that. There is a shoreline permit for the improvements that are being done along the creek with the park and the trails. Once our appeal period would expire, then we would have to transmit the decision also to the Department of Ecology, and they have a 21-day period too, in which they can look at the project. And then following that, there would be construction permits, both the demolition, site work, and then building permits for each of the 3 buildings.
That assumes that the Development Commission
That assumes that, of
approves.
course, yes.
Need to make that clear. All right. Thank you very much, Jerry, and thanks to the applicant for that real, in my opinion, good response to the issues and the questions that were raised last time. I appreciate your work, Jerry. The next period of this meeting will be devoted to public comment. Once again, if there are members of the public that would like to speak, we ask that you come up, sign in, identify yourself, and then identify yourself at the microphone with regard to your name and your address.
We have Bill Conley as the first one on the list.
So, Mr. Conley, if you've already signed in, if you can go up to the mic.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Bill Connolly, and I live in Spokane. I own the property, a property that's adjacent to the site. Its formal address is 1005 Fifth Avenue Northwest. One point on that is that the flow into the parking lot area for that's the Montessori school. And from a safety standpoint, it circles, the parents pick up their children in a circular fashion that's very safe right now, and we want that to continue. And I don't see any problem so far with this project, but just to point that out, the building's address is 1005 Fifth Avenue Northwest, which is Fifth Avenue is that little strip into the driveway of that building right there. It's not Locust. So the bigger concern that I have, and I just want to voice it, is the potential for elevations at the site, ground levels, to be changed and cause a change in the high storm events of the creek. The building was built on the original family home site of the original farm. It was the high point of the farm, and it never flooded. And when the building that's there now was built, it was built 2 feet above the 100-year floodplain. And the water was to go underneath the building and not impact this, what they call the storage capability of the floods. Since the building was built, there have been many events where it's gotten within 6 inches of the floor, so we're 1.5 feet above the 100-year floodplain many times. If there is an elevation change in this development that by accident, not design, causes a backflow of water to where there's a change in the high water event, it could start to impact the building, and that concerns me a lot. And the points that have been made are the build out is being made of the 100-year flood, and then also to the 500-year flood levels. This means there is potential for changes in elevations on the site, causing a backflow. Imagine the sink, your kitchen sink, where the drain starts to get plugged up with stuff in the sink, and you're running the water at full capacity all the time. The sink drains itself, but if it starts to get plugged up enough, pretty soon you start to see the sink fill up, and that's the potential that could occur here. So I'm just expressing my concern, and in hopes that the elevations that the developers and the architects, who are very, very good at what they do, will maintain that those elevations, so that when that sheet flow goes, that the water will continue to do what it's done for the last 60 years. So, and also, I wanted to point out that in the past, the Issaquah Creek goes down Locust Street at such a high velocity that when I would walk out onto that street, I was concerned I might, in fact, people did fall down because of the current flow going down Locust during the middle of that high storm event. It's actually very fast, and when it would go down into that open ditch that we saw in the pictures up here, and would flow at a velocity that would move past the site. Now with that ditch being tight-lined, it could cause water to back up. So I don't know how much time you're giving me, but I think I've probably exceeded it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Next on the list is Darlene Coleman.
My name is Darlene Cohen. One of the things that bothers me about this is the parking is unrealistic. I think that most of you here are either married or something else, but can you imagine telling your spouse, if you were in a one-bedroom apartment, that she couldn't have a car? Or she telling you that? I think in the world of being in a hub situation like the University District, Capitol Hill, downtown Seattle, these numbers are realistic. But this is Issaquah. And most of the people that come in that I know have 3 or 4 cars sometimes in a family, and it's totally unnecessary, but they just own them. I think we're in an outside still of everything. We're not over lake. We're not a hub situation yet. We haven't reached that point in Issaquah. And I feel one of the things that are really necessary in meeting the needs of the people who would like to move into this community is realizing that they're not going to sell their car to live here. Nor, at the rate that these apartments are renting, are they going to be living alone. They're going to more than likely be living with a partner. And they're going to have more than one car. So I think we realistically have to look at who Issaquah is today and who we are going to be in the future and address both of these needs. Because as we, excuse me, as we know, in reading the papers and everything, the situation that's going on in Overlake, and they're saying now, okay, there's not going to be direct buses to the city here. They're going to be going to Mercer Island, and you're going to be transferring. That was just in the paper. And I think what we have to realize is that a lot of people who are going to be working from this area, since you're not creating jobs, are going to be using their car to get there. I mean, if I worked in the Highlands and I was living down here, I certainly wouldn't bicycle up the hill. So I think that parking kind of bothers me, that it doesn't really meet the needs of people who would want to live in Issaquah. And then there was one other thing I wanted to address that Mr. Brennan, was kind of touching on the issue earlier, is that during the is it Field and Stream? No, that's the magazine. It's, what is it? Rivers and Streams, I'm sorry. Thank you. There was a fellow that was in the audience that brought up something that I didn't think of. I don't know if even Connie thought of it, to tell you the truth, is that, Connie, you're over in the corner, is that, what if it does flood, or what if there's a flooding situation, which we know it does, in the area? What happens with handicapped people on this site? Is it handicap friendly for people? And we all could become handicapped. You could break your leg tomorrow. You could have a hip operation. So we all can become handicapped. We don't need to be born that way. And I don't know if it's handicap friendly, and that's one of the things I'd like to ask. That's it.
Mr. Flood, Blake Flood?
Sorry about the last name.
What's he going to talk about?
I am Blake Flood. It's true. I've spoken before, just that I'm not just opposed to the.
Can we get you to your address too?
Sure. 24213 Southeast 40th Place, Issaquah 98027. Not opposed to the building. I've seen what GGLO has done in Redmond and Seattle. To me, the whole issue is the site. I don't know how many people here are residents or business owners in Seattle, in Issaquah, but I'm sure anyone who saw the last flooding event, the last thing that came to their mind is, let's put 600 people, 400 cars, three large buildings on a site. This is going to be it's a guaranteed floodplain, right? We know that's an unusual situation. I don't know how many buildings you're currently doing in 100% floodplain. GGLO? Are you doing other buildings in 100% floodplain? Well, I'm assuming since you can't name one, that maybe not. To me, it borders on reckless endangerment. That's my whole. It's when we watch TV and we see flood things and we see people rebuilding. The typical response is, what were they thinking? That's the question I'm asking you guys to ask yourself now. So, assuming it goes forward, just the whole process, I think it should be beneficial to the developer. I understand that. Should be beneficial to Issaquah. Should be kind of should be good for both of us. My feeling is they're getting the better of Issaquah on this. And I think the example of that, if you look and see where they're doing developments elsewhere, they're having their way with you, in my opinion. Okay. Pricing, I've heard mentioned that this is a good price point. I don't know what that number is. What these are going to rent for? What's that? Well, that's a question that I've asked, and I don't know what it's going to be. I heard someone here last week say it was a good price point. What is the price point? Do the people in Issaquah know that, or are we waiting to find out? Who will be managing the building? Is it Lennar or an outside? Okay. Is that the name, Atlas? Is the management firm Atlas?
No,
Okay.
This really is an interrogation.
I know, no, I'm just asking, I mean, these are questions.
Mr. Chair, should he be asking us questions?
No? So do we know who the management?
You
So-
can ask questions, but the applicant has the opportunity, and I can also
Okay,
tell you that there are relevant issues and there are not relevant issues in terms of compliance with the city code
okay.
and approval lists. And the economics of it.
Oh, make sure you're speaking into the microphone.
No, that's me. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
you-
Jerry. The economics are up to the property owner. They are not an issue for
Well-
us to consider.
I'm saying since this is the first one that you're doing, I'm just saying that if the more you know, knowing who manages it may be an important question to ask, that's all I'll say. And that's, again, that's your dialogue with them. Traffic, the one traffic issue I had, is 7th going to be a 2-lane road? So in other words, when you're exiting 7th onto Gilman, there'll be a signal. Is it just 1 lane to go left and right?
Jerry?
There'll be a left turning lane onto 7th at the signal.
So people can go right without having to wait for left.
Right,
and
that's what's being looked at right now is the channelization.
So that's the middle lane.
The middle lane, yes.
Okay. Because I know, my feeling is people having to wait for people to make a left turn, making a right turn, they will find other ways to get out onto Gilman. So I just see that as a potential traffic problem.
There is additional traffic review being done on that right now, too, on this channelization.
And again, like I say, my whole thing is putting a lot of bodies where you know there's going to be water. Right now, people can not come to work. But when you live there, you got to come and go. There's kids, there's adults. So something to think about. Parking, the only parking issue, I think a couple of you guys have touched on it. If people have to pay to park, tendency is to not want to pay and to try to find, that becomes an enforcement issue for Issaquah. These people renting are going to have friends and family. They're not shut-ins and social outcasts. They'll have visitors. So again, I don't know if that 1.2, if those numbers factor in those things. So that's all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next is John Traeger.
I'm John Traeger at 710 7th Avenue Northwest. I'm also the vice chair on the Issaquah Economic Vitality Commission. And so my first remarks are on part of the commission, and my later remarks are on part of just being a resident about a block and a half away from the proposed site. So from the EVC, Economic Vitality Commission lens, we're excited and supportive about this development. One of the gaps that we have discovered and potential threats to the Issaquah's economic vitality in the future is there's a shortage of workforce housing in our city. Young professionals who may be working at Costco headquarters or at the hospital or other down at the Microsoft Siemens office, they have to come from out of town. There's no rental housing really available. So even without subsidized units, this is a beginning of a good development in central Issaquah, which is definitely part of what the plan is to have quite a few additional residents live in the central Issaquah area. So this is a step in the right direction. So as a resident, a block and a half away, on the parking issue, I think it's good what you're doing. I think we have to start somewhere. Central Issaquah plan says that 1.2 units, and there's a reason for that. And there's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. You've got to start somewhere, and once we start building out Gilman Boulevard, and of course you have to support your legislators and county to get the transit funding to come with it. But all the other cities that we're competing with are doing the same thing. They're building transit-oriented development. They're not paving over the world for parking spaces, and this is the right thing to do. I also understand this is a difficult site, and it's unfortunate the buildings are set back from Gilman, but it's good to see that there isn't a sea of cars in front of the buildings, that they're underneath or internal. So that's definitely a good visual impact. I appreciate the design there. And as far as those walls go, I wouldn't be unhappy if the commission granted a variance to do something different than the walls, like maybe art or something, because I think those little stub walls are I get the letter of the rules, but the surface water kind of dominates in that site, so they don't really have a choice. I don't think the gazebo is a good idea for some of the reasons that were already discussed. I walk this area frequently every night, and there's already some transient issues right there on the bridge over the Issaquah Creek on Gilman. So this would just not help if they had some space. On traffic mitigation, the new light on Gilman is really appreciated. It's actually needed right now. So it's a pretty dangerous left turn scenario on Saturdays when Gilman's really busy. But I am concerned about the speed and volume on 7th between Juniper and Holly. The Bridgewater condominiums have about 10 driveways that back directly out of their garages onto 7th. And there will be, you already mentioned, I think it was 90% of the traffic was going to go out through 7th. And so I'm concerned that with that additional traffic, they have two options to get to Newport Way. And they will cut through already, people already cut through just to take the other stop sign. And so it's a potentially dangerous condition. So I'd like to have the commission add an additional requirement for speed humps on 7th for traffic to keep the speed down. They can drive through there, but if they already drive at the pace they are now, but double the traffic, it's going to be very dangerous. And that's it. Thank you.
At this, we will now go into give the staff and the applicant an opportunity to address. This will end public comment. We have no more. I'm sorry. You are going to speak? Okay. Would you sign in, please? And
my name is Connie Marsh, and I have a store at 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, Suite B11, and I also live in Issaquah. So in the design changes, I was in Redmond this weekend, and I saw very similar buildings, but the windows were much smaller suddenly, and it didn't look very good. So I see the pictures, and I see the size of the windows, and I see the strong horizontal lines, and it makes them more appealing. I don't entirely understand how much of the detail that is on the buildings is a requirement for what we will see. And so small changes like that, I think, can make a big difference. And I think that's just something I don't understand, not doing the architectural things that often. Also, in Redmond, with the same sort of small modulation in height from a distance, it looked very level, and I wasn't, so from a ways away it was still very flat, and I'm concerned with these pictures that it's still going to seem very flat given any distance away. Then when Lucy was talking about the conditions going into potentially construction conditions, I didn't understand how that anyone would be able to understand that it's actually being put into a condition, because it sounded like there was still a lot of discussion, and so it was hard to know what actually was going to be required. And that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, as sometimes things get lost that seem important, and through no one's fault, it's just not there, and we're surprised. One of the things that we talked about at the last meeting, and I think there was a little support, was some potential for interpretive signage on the lot, so that when people were walking through the public areas, there was a learning experience happening at the same time. And I didn't see that responded to in the staff report. I agree with the comments of, I have grave concerns on putting this many people in a place that floods, where there's no place where you can walk or drive out of it that is not through water during a flood. Even if they're told about it, it seems like a bad press release waiting to happen, and we're going to see it on the news, and that isn't really what I want to have for my first project in the Central Issaquah Plan. So at a very base level, I disagree with what is happening, and probably the first thing I would ask for was a large capital improvement to prevent all areas around this being flooded if that isn't going to happen from this development, because I don't think it's responsible to approve this development with that restriction, even if our rules do not precisely say that we cannot. I have no control over that, but I do know what I want is I want an awesome city. I want an awesome Central Issaquah Plan. And so we have the strict rules, and then we have what steps it up and makes Issaquah even better, and what were the things of this for me that were missing to make it awesome, because I like the landscaping, the building is sort of meh for me, and so for me, what was missing is amusement. It doesn't seem fun. It seems green, sort of, and it seems wet, but it doesn't seem human or fun or frivolous or, I don't know. You know, my Issaquah may not be everyone's. And the last thing, of course, in the middle of the night, I thought, you know, I really want a restaurant up there because I want to be eating on my barbecue on the top of their building and looking at the great views they're going to have. And that seems like a totally missed opportunity. But, you know, will you give me a restaurant? Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. At this juncture, as I understand the new process, staff and applicant will have an opportunity to address, correct, rebut, if you so choose.
So, Mr. Chairman, mostly we feel that the comments that have been made were addressed in our briefing response memo, and we didn't need to add anything. But I think there are two pieces that Ms. Marsh brought up that we'd like to touch on. One, clarification is around the construction conditions, because I realize that's a new tool to us and a new tool to you. So just to hopefully give Connie a certain level and everyone a certain level of confidence, the construction conditions is a document that's attached to the staff report. So it isn't a nebulous thing floating around. It's actually a list that is an attachment and part of the materials that support the staff report.
And the staff report will be available to the public online. They can go in and call it up on the website.
It is there already.
Yeah.
And there was a briefing memo
That's,
as well, too.
I'm just underscoring that.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
is immediately available to the public.
I think it was available on this, a week, see if I can do the math, April 9th when we issued the first staff report. I think staff is supportive of the interpretive signage that, I don't think we intentionally didn't include that in the briefing response memo, it just was overlooked. We're supportive of it. In looking at the Central Issaquah standards, while Ms. Marsh finished her comments, there's a clear expectation for wayfinding signage. I don't think that the interpretive signage is in conflict, but I'm not sure that it's specifically called out. So it seems like something that we will work with the applicant on. I'm just not sure that we can add it as additional condition, but I'll keep looking at the code as we speak.
Is there anything else, the applicant, that want to clear up anything, comment, refute, rebut? All right, in that case, excuse me, it is time for us to go to the commission, and we will have this be two parts. One will be comments by each commissioner, if you are so inclined. We'll go around and do a cumulative review of that. And then the next step will be to decide on, we'll make the decision and record it as needed.
And I
So-
just wanted to let the commissioners know that, so we've been drafting conditions as we go along, and
Yeah.
just let me know when you would like to see that.
Okay.
introduced this at the last meeting. It's the
I
design
think we've got,
standard checklist. It's similar to the green sheets that you've had in the past. So it kind of gives you some guidance.
so this is the document that we'll use as we're going through the ultimate process, the decision process, okay? So Katie, or Commissioner Karas, if you would like to start with your comments, reviews, if you have any.
Is your microphone on?
I think staff and the applicant have done a good job with their responses to what was brought up in the meeting in April, and I am generally comfortable with the project and the mitigation measures and the analysis that's been done. I know there's a concern about flooding. Again, I'm comfortable with what has been done and the planning and engineering that's gone into it, and I think I think it's a well thought out project. Am I allowed to ask any more questions, or is this okay? I know that we're at really the preliminary stages here, but I'm used to seeing a little bit more discussion about the actual construction phase in the SEPA checklist, and I'm wondering if there's any information about time period, phasing, truck routes. I know it's not a huge project, but that comes to mind when we're talking about all these things.
Okay, the plan would be to initiate construction probably 1st of June, as soon as we can. So first
Oh,
part of
like-
June, certainly, yeah, as quickly as we can.
2014?
I'm sorry?
2014?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I think with the approvals, we're pretty far ahead in terms of our architecture to be getting land use approvals, really. So we will be submitting for actual building permits in about a month, and we've just recently submitted permits for site work and for flood hazard and those kinds of things. Construction will take about 22 months. What was your other question? Oh, truck haul routes?
Yeah,
They were just submitted today as part
Oh,
of the demolition permit.
staging area, is there, I'm thinking.
Mostly
I'm
on
just thinking-
site. Mostly
Oh,
on site,
okay,
yeah.
just kind of moving around,
Mhm.
okay.
And
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just one thing it's a follow-up on the staging and the timing. Anything that's going to be done with the creek and the modification of the riparian area
Right.
is already been looked at with regard to the run, the salmon run that starts in August, and there's not going to be any, I mean, there's,
Not specifically, no, and that's a good thing to point out.
yeah, I would,
Right.
yeah, because
Schedule-wise, no,
these
that
are,
is not.
these are federally protected endangered species, and we need to make real sure that we don't run afoul of the EPA when we're modifying a habitat.
Right. As I try to visualize the schedule, I think it's actually next spring that work would be done. And we want to catch it so that we have as much dry weather for the plants to take hold as possible.
And I would just add that, this is a land use permit, which is kind of a big conceptual framework. There will be construction permits required for everything, and that would be the time where conditions about the timing of work associated with the stream would be worked through based on the kind of work and impacts it might have.
Okay, thanks. I also was just wondering, when you did your traffic study, is that based on, like, square footage of type of building, or number of units, or number of people?
All of those things.
All of
There's a really extensive model that's been developed by ITE, International Transportation Engineers, I think. And we took very conservative positions on all of those things, both in terms of characterizing the existing uses in the shopping center. We also didn't take into account things like people who would take buses, people who would carpool.
You did
or
not take
bicycle.
those?
We did not count
Oh.
those. So the assumption was made that all of our residents would drive. So I think the results are very conservative.
Okay, thank you. Darlene brought up ADA compliant, and I know that it's a requirement that buildings are all ADA compliant. I think the concern was during a flood. Could you speak to that a little bit, or?
Well, the buildings and the site entirely will be ADA compliant, and in fact, it's important enough to Lennar that we actually peer review our civil engineers and our architects' work separately, just in terms of ADA.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm done with you.
Okay. I'll stay just in case.
I also want to emphasize that I also feel, I think it was mentioned, the chicken and egg, and we know what we want Issaquah to look like. We know what we have in the CIP, and this project is really meant to lead us toward that, lead us toward a community that's more dependent, less dependent on vehicles, and I think this is a step in the right direction. So those are my comments.
Commissioner? Commissioner Sella?
Well, I also think that the staff and the proponent responded well to the comments that were made. I think the things that were brought up tonight that raised questions in my mind were, while there was a traffic study, it wasn't obvious that there was traffic study affecting Locust Street, and maybe there was. It just wasn't obvious to me that happened, and so.
It would have looked at that, but I can't tell you the numbers.
All right, I would hope it would. It just seems like there's a real liability there if it doesn't, because people are going to go the path of least resistance, and so I would hope that was the case. I'm not sure I know what a fun aspect of a project like this would be, but I think that the colors are appealing. The modification of architectural design was pleasing to me, and I think that it was a good effort. So I don't really have any other comments. The other thing, I guess, other than I understand the 0 to 10 foot building line, that's not a possibility. I kind of like those walls, and I think that it would be valuable to have law enforcement take a look at that and make sure that wasn't a liability. But I think that the notion of having somebody with their back to the street would be way more imposing to me than having a wall there that would offer you some kind of protection. And I think over time we're going to see Gilman build up, and there's going to be more and more structure right next to the sidewalk, or the property line anyway. And I think that this is a good start. So good job on my part, on your part.
Thank
you. I agree with previous comments about the responsiveness of the applicant team. Appreciate you taking the time to respond to the questions and concerns we expressed initially, particularly around the building design. I understand that you're getting close to building permit. That means you've made a huge investment, and making changes is costly to do that, but appreciate the changes that you have made. I want you to encourage you to continue to work with staff and tweak the building design, make sure that it really fits in the modulation and things that you've talked about. I thought were nice additions there. Also appreciate the applicant's patience. I'm sure when you heard you're the first one coming through the new process for the Central Issaquah plan, you probably wondered if you wanted to take that risk, and appreciate you. Somebody has to do it, and I appreciate that it's somebody that's very competent at what they do, so that's helpful. Some of the concerns I heard tonight that I agree with, and I think they've been addressed, in addition to just the building design, is dealing with the flooding and the response in the response memo, much more detail about the study, the flood study that was done, the compensatory storage and how that's all worked. I also understand the concern of the neighbors and the residents who are familiar with what has happened on this site previously and not wanting to see that change on this property create offsite impact, negative offsite impact. So just a quick comment to staff. There's a certification process required for FEMA in the floodplain for this particular, to establish that the building has created the floor level. It's above the 100-year flood elevation. But what about the displacement that might create, is there a certification process that's required to ensure that we in fact are satisfying the compensatory storage requirement and we're not creating an offsite negative condition? You know, if that's part of it. There was a comment in the response memo that there was a certification requirement, and it wasn't clear to me how that works. It says by an engineer with appropriate hydrologic modeling methods were used to comply with these requirements shall accompany the flood hazard permit.
So I'm not super familiar with all those details. I do know that the compensatory storage was built many years ago.
Right.
And is associated with this project. I think the other piece that's in progress is that the city is doing a third-party peer review of the flooding design or the design to avoid flooding.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure that is that complete yet?
I think it is, but I haven't heard.
I haven't seen it
Okay.
yet either.
Okay.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, that kind of, and I think it's good just because of the sensitivity around that by the community, but I think even by the city and from an environmental standpoint. So I think it's appropriate that there is a third-party review going on to ensure that it's satisfied those concerns or addressed those. A question raised about the traffic impacts on 7th Avenue Northwest and the additional demand that we're pushing out there, and how does that impact potential conflicts with other neighboring properties. I think we want to make sure that the transportation folks are paying close attention to that and dealing with the additional calming or traffic controls that are necessary to make sure we don't create safety issues because of that increased demand along that street. So I'll probably suggest adding a condition just to make sure that is being looked at. I'm guessing it is, but I think it'll be important.
So let me say two things that you brought up a point that I forgot that maybe we should have touched on. So speed humps, the East Side Fire and Rescue is very strongly opposed. There are certain kinds of pedestrian tables that are being employed in Seattle that that are different than what East Side Fire and Rescue has been opposed to, but I'm not really certain that is a need that we need to go to. I think part of what we'll see is that the narrower design of roads that are built into the Central Issaquah standards are inherently add traffic calming, as well as some of the curb bulbs that the applicant has proposed is consistent with the standards, and that's part of why that's there.
Yeah.
Is that with the street trees, with the curb bulbs, with the on-street parking, all of that creates an environment in which drivers are not as comfortable driving fast.
Yeah, no, yeah. And that, I guess my suggestion was not to impose a solution like speed humps, where everybody seems to go real quick if they want to try to slow people down. There are other ways to do it that aren't quite as invasive and don't slow our emergency response folks down. But the point was just making sure that has been looked at, and let's make sure that if there are adjustments that need to be made because the engineers are saying they're still going to be coming too fast through here, we've got a lot of volume that is going to create conflict, let's figure out how to mitigate that. And I'm not going to suggest the solution, but just the concern. Other than that, I'm happy with the project. I think it's a good project. Oh, one more minor, Connie's point about interpretive signs. In the park, at least down by the creek, that might be a nice addition, simple, interesting, gives people who are wandering around something to stop and look at. And it is part of the Issaquah image, this kind of focus on the environment. So I think that would be something that would be good to see, and I think I would enjoy that personally. So, that's all I've got to say.
I'm not going to repeat many of the points that have already been made by my fellow commissioners, but I do want to say that, again, we're feeling our way through this new process, and I am encouraged by so far how this has come out. I hope we continue to do this. There are obviously refinements that need to be made. I do share the concern that was expressed earlier about the need for a little bit more detail in some of the construction areas. I also believe that the process and this was touched on by one of the members of the public that spoke, and you mentioned, you did address this, Lucy, but I have seen projects that have gone through the Development Commission, and then when they were finished, and I drove past them, I said, whoa, when did that happen? And I don't quite understand that. I wish there were a mechanism for, and I'm not quite sure how to do this, but the fact is that members of the commission frequently get asked by members of the public, did you approve that? Or, you know, I mean, it's just fact. It's one of the things that goes along with the job. And the overwhelming majority of the projects that we've done, as far as I'm concerned, are fine, are great. But every now and then, there's one that seems to me to be different in the color palette that's used in the building, or some of the materials or whatever. And I'm not sure how that happens. So this is a general thing. I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but I do agree that it would be nice if there were a way of informing the public and the Development Commission of changes that were agreed on by the staff, by the city and the applicant, that are going to result in changes in the appearance or the traffic flow, or, you know, whatever they are. So we'll know, and not only will we know, but we'll know in the future when we have issues like this that come up, that this is the way they're addressed, or how they've been addressed in the past.
May I speak to that?
Sure.
So I was looking in the staff report. There's some language that we often have used in the urban villages, and I think it may actually be somewhere in the central Issaquah plan, which is why we didn't put in the staff report. And maybe Jerry will have a Vulcan mind meld and he'll find it for me. Generally speaking, the way we approach it is that you've seen certain plans and drawings, and we recognize that this is a more conceptual level and things are going to continue to evolve. There's a certain envelope that's been created through this review of expectation. If things stay within that sort of envelope as they evolve and refine and go through construction, then it's not considered a modification because we're pursuing that. So if, maybe to take Connie's example, and I'm getting more informal, I'm now calling her Connie instead of Miss Marsh. For instance, right now, the Issaquah design standards talk about multi-light windows. They're showing multi-light windows. Let's say half the windows became not multi-light windows. Then, and this has come up. You're talking about a level of detail. That might be a point at which we need to say to the applicant, we feel like you're beginning to get to the edge of that envelope, and we need to have a conversation about it. If there was, I'm trying to think of something, well, something egregious. I mean, it's a requirement. If the park went away, we'd be back here having a conversation with you. So, there's a certain level of degrees of change. It is a judgment call. Our intent is to use not only the staff report and the memo, but the conversations that we've heard with the public and with the commission to sort of establish that envelope. If something isn't really addressed in the staff report, the commission's never really commented on it. We feel like that's probably a lower priority, and that we're just working that out through the standards that are in the plan. If it's something that you have spent a lot of time talking about, the public has raised concerns about, or it's inconsistent with the plan, then we may very well be back here having a conversation.
Okay. I would just observe that the objective, as far as I'm concerned, is to give the public, to give everybody, but particularly the residents, the taxpayers, as much visibility and have the process be as transparent as possible. Now, the definition of as possible, obviously, we're talking about city staff time and, new websites and things like that. But if we're going to have the minimum degree of cynicism, frankly, and the maximum degree of faith in the process, that's going to come about by transparency and timely awareness of changes and proposals and so on. And we're doing a good job of that, but I just think we need to constantly be aware making sure that when there's a change, people understand why and, what the ramifications are.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just had an epiphany, I guess, that the new process, as best I can tell, doesn't include some of the specificity that we've been used to in the past.
Right.
The consequence of that is that we've created an environment where that we can express our views and opinions and ideas, but we're really giving a end product specification that says, in general, we want it to look like this. And so as the applicant listens to the public and the commissioners and people that have that input, there's a trust that starts getting developed that has to be redeemed by the applicant, and the process will only be as valuable as the redemption of that trust. So as you heard the comments and understand the concerns, you can make this really great, or you can make it really awful. And so that's just an exhortation that I would offer to you folks, that as it proceeds, if it does, that you understand there's a lot at stake here. I think the process is a good one. It requires a knowledgeable group of people getting together and saying, here's our best thoughts, here's what we want, and then having you put that together. And when we come back here in 20 years, if it's still here and if it's done, we say, wow, we got it. That was a really good thing. So I think that whole notion of lack of specificity is making all of us a little nervous, because each one of us have a certain thing that would like to really get wired in and say, man, I'd really like to see 1.5 parking spots for, or whatever. I don't care what the number is. Or anyway, so sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm going to continue here, and I'm just going to say that we brought this up at the last meeting as far as the applicant, and you being the first out of the box. I used to jump out of airplanes in the military, and you start doing training at 1,200 feet and then in daylight, and you end up going out at 800 feet at night. And the first guy in the stick, the first guy out the door, is either owes the jump master money or, is just really asked for it. You're going to be the first out of the door on a night jump with this. So the expectation is that the system, the CIP, the application, the city staff is going to result in a net improvement in the city. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So you're really going to set the standard on this, and the expectation is that it's going to be a net addition. It's going to mitigate extant flooding problems. It's going to make them better, not worse. The traffic make a left turn right now on 7th Avenue onto Gilman. I don't go there. Literally, I don't go there. I never go there. I've had to go in and get a lunch while I'm waiting for the opportunity to get out on Gilman. So I do take a different opinion on the walls behind the benches. It's ironic that on the very first application for a project in the Central Issaquah plan, as much work is going to there, that I would like to see a variance. I just don't see the benefit of it other than compliance with the plan. And that's important, and I understand that this is precedent setting, as I just got through saying, but I don't, to me, they're ugly. And I don't see a functional purpose for them other than compliance with the plan. And I'm not really comfortable saying they ought to be done away with. Maybe I don't know if you've considered things like heavy grills that are open that can still have vines growing up on them that just aren't concrete. If we're going to have something there, I don't know if that could be code compliant. But the idea of gray cement walls however what the feet is, the distance is between them, to me hinders appreciation of the landscaping, the architecture, the swales and everything from the street side, and I don't get the benefit of them other than compliance. So I'd really like to see perhaps some negotiation there, and if it has to result in a request for a variance, then maybe that's the way we do it. But it really is a significant issue to me because it's right there, and I think we need to be flexible. The interpretive signs, I think that's a great idea. I would suggest you go to the hatchery and go into the native vegetation that's maintained by the Issaquah Garden Club. They have signs there, and I expect you to be using native vegetation in the riparian areas. It would be great for people to go by there and for them to understand this is stuff you can plant in your property that doesn't need fertilizer, it doesn't need watering, and so on and so forth. But I would counsel that if you're going to put any kind of thing like that in there, they got to be vandal proof. We don't have a problem with that at the hatchery, but if they're down there, they're going to end up in the creek if they're not, so then you get into a cost of individual signs, but there's no percentage in putting them in if they're not going to stay there and resist people trying to get rid of them for fun. I think it's very important for the city to come to an agreement with the police department about consistency. I think that is an issue, but we can't, in my opinion, you can't tell pedestrians when you cross this street, you can protect yourself by hitting the flasher, but when you cross this street, you're on your own. And it's not only a conditioning of the pedestrians, it's a conditioning of the drivers. So I do think there needs to be, and if it results in the flashers coming out of the Newport behind the hatchery, fine. But I understand now that why they're hesitant about that. And it obviously doesn't have to be at every intersection, but at major places like that where we're encouraging people to cross a street at other than an intersection, to me it seems to be an obvious need for some kind of warning to both the drivers and the pedestrians that they're crossing at an area where there has not been a crossing before. The flood situation, I understand, I absolutely believe, and I've had conversations with members of the Rivers and Stream Board about this just anecdotally about the studies and so on. I absolutely understand the work that's gone into that, and I have faith in this. But the one thing that I got to be really clear about is the observation that was made earlier by a number of people that what we don't want, what none of us want, is to have Como and Cairo and King and Seattle Times out here going, brand new building in Issaquah and the people can't get in or out. So access to, even if it's, I don't know what, one per building or multiple potential, but some way to get in and out of the building in the event of an overflow situation with the swale, which I believe will address most of the issues most of the time. But we don't want Issaquah to get tagged with that. And then it comes into how did that happen? I think that's an absolutely legitimate point. And it may be that you've already addressed that. I haven't seen that, and I think maybe the questions that have come up so far have been because it hasn't been made really clear how, in fact, people can get out of the building if there's water everywhere. And that's going to happen. Lastly, I'll just restate that this is really a matter of faith for all of us. I mean, the citizens of Issaquah have faith that the city staff and the applicant are going to come up with something that's going to be a net addition to the city, and it's going to not have a negative impact on their lives, whether it's traffic or water movement or herbicides in the creek or whatever. So, so far it seems to me that this project is going to be a net addition to the city, and it's a good way to start the CIP. So, with that, we will now. I suggest, and this is again, I keep using this excuse, rather than reading the entire checklist, what I'd like to do is just read the subject of the checklist, and the way this is done, for those of you who haven't done it before with what we used to call the green sheet, you just state your opinion. Whether when I say, for example, the first one is the intent of the circulation development chapter is to create a comprehensive, highly interconnected circulation facility network, and then I'm not going to read the rest of the stuff. We've already gone over this, so if you agree, then you'll say acceptable or not applicable And this is, we'll just do this as we do when we're voting on a motion, and say all in favor, say aye, or, you know, if you think it's acceptable, say yes, and we'll mark that down. If you have a suggested condition, this is where we do it, when we do through this. And when we have completed this review, then we will decide on whether or not we're going to make the motions, the two motions that we're going to need to do. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
That look good? Okay. All right, so the first one is 6.0, circulation development. The intent of the circulation development chapter is to create a comprehensive, highly interconnected circulation facility with the three criteria there. Do we believe that this application is acceptable in that degree?
Yes.
Mike, Commissioner? Okay. If you go ahead and check it. I don't know if we're going to collect these or what, or if this is just for our benefit.
Well, I think staff will fill it out, and that way we'll have one to put in the file.
Okay. 12.0 is circulation design. The intent of the circulation design chapter is to create a comprehensive circulation facility network. Have we done that?
So I guess this is the place where the issues raised and concerns I expressed about 7th Avenue Northwest and ensuring, I'll probably suggest a condition here to, something to the effect that will assess the need for the addition of traffic calming or controls, something to that effect. I'll enter a condition when we come back to the motion.
Okay. Okay. 7.0 is community space development. The intent of the community space development chapter is to establish standards and requirements for the provisions of community spaces that will inspire an animated and connected urban space.
It's acceptable.
Acceptable to me, too. All right. 13.0, the intent of the community space design chapter is to establish standards for the provisions of community spaces that will inspire an animated and connected urban community where, and building, wait, is this a repeat?
It does kind of sound that
Okay.
way. Oh, one's to inspire.
Oh, yeah, all right. To inspire an animated and connected urban community.
Acceptable.
Acceptable? Yeah. Commissioner? All right. 9.0, the intent of the sign chapter is to establish standards for the regulation of design, placement, size, renovation, and proper maintenance of all exterior signs and sign structures within the central Issaquah area.
I think you skipped parking.
You skipped a page.
I did?
Number 8 and 15.
Oh, it's stuck together, I'm sorry. 8.0, parking development. The intent of the parking development chapter is to establish standards for the design and configuration of parking facilities based on urban rather than suburban densities and needs that encourage the use of parking garages rather than surface parking and support a pedestrian-friendly and attractive urban design.
It's acceptable.
Acceptable. Okay. Parking design. The intent of the parking design chapter is to establish parking standards based on urban rather than suburban densities that support a pedestrian-friendly, small-scale, mixed-use urban environment and contribute to the public realm.
Acceptable.
Acceptable? Okay. Now we go to signs. And I already read it, so.
Acceptable.
Acceptable.
Don't do over.
All right, 10.0, landscape development. The intent of landscape development chapter is to establish standards for landscaping and trees with central Issaquah that draw nature into this developing urban community. Adding green elements to soften the urban form provides opportunities for transitions from the natural edges into the built environment and ensures a livable, verdant, attractive public realm that restores both nature and human activity and contributes to the success of the establishment of the Green Necklace.
It's acceptable.
Acceptable? All right. Landscape design. The intent of the landscape design chapter is to establish standards for the design of landscaping and trees within central Issaquah.
It's acceptable.
Commissioner Sella? Okay. 11.0, site design. The intent of the site design chapter is to establish site design standards that orient development so that it defines the public realm, reacts to and acknowledges the natural environment, and provides the and improves the pedestrian experience.
Acceptable.
Acceptable. Okay. 14.0, buildings. The intent of the building design chapter is to establish building design standards that create a vibrant, pedestrian-friendly, built environment through buildings designed to frame and engage the public realm.
There was a staff recommended additional condition on, just to continue to emphasize the need for attention to the details of the building facades and modulation, et cetera, just so, I think it's crafted in a way that essentially does that. It continues to encourage work there. So not suggesting that you're not on the right track. I think what we saw tonight was responsive to what we said last time, but I'll suggest condition during the motion.
All right. And, dare I say it, last page, yes. 17.0 is lighting. The intent of the lighting design chapter is to establish a hierarchy of lighting designs and illumination levels that provide an attractive visual element that supports and enhances this developing urban environment while addressing the safety and security of both pedestrian and vehicular traffic beyond daylight hours.
We didn't receive a lot of information on lighting design here, so I don't know that I can really comment. It's part of the permitting process that they'll need to go through.
I agree with Commissioner Brennan. What is not in here, and I believe it came up in the first meeting, but there is an impact to be avoided on the creek. The lighting cannot flood or overflow into the creek area, again, because of the migratory nature of the environment, the critters that live in the creek, the migrating salmon. So that, I'm sure you're aware of that, but that's another thing that needs to be taken into the design and the placement of the lighting.
And without looking, I'm virtually certain that that is what the standards say.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so,
So can I, real quick, staff mentioned that during the discussion you had, in response to the discussion, generated some additional suggested condition language that you wanted us to think about.
So one option would be to put it up on the document camera so that everyone could see it.
yes, that's fine.
So there are 3 conditions, or 2 new conditions and an edit. So I'm just going to read these in case my handwriting isn't clear. During construction permit review, the city and applicant will work to identify elements of a public education plan related to potential flooding. The education plan will include signs in the garage and legal notice to ensure that future owners of the property are aware of the site characteristics. Other possible components might include information provided to residents during leasing and residence.
Can I, quick question on that? A legal notice to ensure that future owners, this is leased housing or condominium?
You're talking about owning the property.
This would be the property owner.
This would ride with the land and the building. Okay, that makes sense. I thought this was targeting the ownership. So the noticing and the education is for residents, and then the more legal notice would be ride with the property. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
This is fine with me, but it seems to me, again, I'm the guy that can't find the on button on my home computer, so I'm absolutely, but it seems to me that one way of addressing this would be to have the email addresses of this property and other properties that come into the picture, and eventually, I suppose, everybody in Issaquah, so that they could be specifically notified that there are flood conditions and you need to get out now. And if they're not there, they don't read their email or whatever, whether it's a Twitter alert or something, some kind of technology that is basically cutting edge. I don't know of any other city that does that, but I also don't know any reason why it couldn't be done, especially with a new project like this where it's a finite number of residents in a hazard area. So why not see if we can develop a system to notify people, there's a flood coming and you need to get out.
And so, again, I just took a shot at this, but the intent of the way I wrote it was to include those options, but not to specify them, because I don't,
No, I'm not
Okay.
saying that this needs to be a requirement for
Right, just
Lennar or anything.
informational.
I'm just saying that I think the city has an opportunity using this project to establish a cutting-edge alert system based on internet alerts
Okay.
to specific addresses.
okay.
Okay?
Yeah. All right. So the next new condition is, during the construction of Building C, its courtyard will be, I left the word be out, be evaluated by staff and the applicant to determine if a secondary minor walkway is warranted. If appropriate, the walkway will be low impact, such as stepping stones.
That works.
Yep.
I think that
Does me.
gets it for me.
And then what I did, I sacrificed my memo and tore it up to edit condition, I'm just going to move this over a little bit. Condition 8. Let me, actually, let's see if I can. So the edits were let's see, I'm going to do it this way. Nope. So the first sentence is unchanged, and then, so I think it's in the second sentence. If the city identifies that there appears to be off-site impacts due to low on-site parking usage, the city may request that the property owner will conduct a paid parking survey during a peak period acceptable to the director to ascertain and confirm that paid parking is being rented at a reasonable minimum rate based on resident car ownership, vacancy rates, etc. If rental rates of paid parking do not achieve a reasonable usage rate of the paid parking stalls, the property owner must adjust the rental charged monthly until such time as the reasonable use rate is achieved. The parking survey must be submitted within 2 weeks, etc., as it's written. So basically, in all, the intent on the fly was that in that first sentence, that we identify some of the factors that would establish a reasonable use rate, and then it's just that becomes a term that's referred to in the rest of the condition.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
that? So Brad Reisinger.
You want to
Yeah.
come up and speak on
Speak
the
to the
microphone?
microphone, yes.
So I guess my
Could
just
you
question.
identify yourself by name and your business address?
Okay.
please?
Brad Reisinger, Lennar Multifamily Communities, 1325 4th Avenue, Suite 1700, Seattle, 98101. I just want to make sure on this one, because everything else is the course of the project, and certificate of occupancy. This one could be open-ended. So as far as how is that then recorded, does it go on to title? Is it condition of the property?
Probably a condition of the building permit.
But what's the duration of it? So this wouldn't happen until after certificate of occupancy.
Right.
So the building permit is complete, the building of the project is complete. So does this go on for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Well, it only is triggered if there is a perceived impact.
Right. In
So-
perpetuity, for the life of the building?
Right.
Okay.
That's what it says.
Okay.
So what,
Sorry, if you're going to speak, you need to come to the mic and identify yourself, please.
Getting quite a crowd.
Sorry to start extemporaneously speaking from the audience. My name is Rich Hill, and I'm counsel for the applicant. And so the way I read this condition is that it would be a condition of the permit, so that it would be in the city's files, it would be enforceable by the city for the life of the project. If the city parking folks or the city building department found that a bunch of folks from the project were parking in Safeway, that would give a motivation and a requirement to do this paid parking survey. And then the following issues would be addressed. As an attorney for property owners, having the city determine parking rates is very troublesome in many ways. But I do understand the intent of this particular permit, and I would only ask that if the commission feels that this is the concept of this condition is appropriate, that the applicant have an opportunity to work with staff to see if there's a way to achieve that concept that doesn't involve the city determining parking rates.
So, just to clarify, we're not asking to set the parking rate? So there is and maybe there's some confusion in the language, so that's why we have these conversations. The reasonable rate is not the paid rate, it's the rate of usage of the parking. So not you, but unless you're the property owner, the property owner would get to decide what they're charging for parking as long as it does not create a negative off-site parking impact. So the city is not interested in establishing what that rental fee is, as long as it results in effective use of the parking.
The concern is that the way it's drafted, the city is determining the rate because the city is would require the rate to be reduced, the parking rate to be reduced, if these conditions weren't met. And what I think we might be able to work out with staff or the commission, if the commission is interested, is to say that the property owner would have an obligation to find a mechanism to make sure that there wasn't overflow parking in the Safeway parking lot. And it may involve reducing the parking rate, but it should be something that the property owner should be able to work out. There's probably other alternatives, such as providing incentives to some of the tenants, for parking, encouraging mass transit, use of multimodal vehicles rather than encouraging people to park in the garage. Because basically, what this is doing, this condition is encouraging tenants to park in the garage rather than give up cars, and so there should be opportunities to work out opportunities for tenants to take the bus and not own a car, so that sort of thing.
So staff would completely concur with that. I guess what I would suggest then is that, and I'll write it on here if we think that this is a appropriate edit, since I don't have a pointer. Where's your laser pointer when I need it? That the property owner must adjust the rental charged or other methods. Okay. Any concerns with the commission if I make those edits?
Well, speaking for myself, I'd like to get a comprehensive review. I'm frankly getting confused about where we are on this thing and what we're talking about. So
I was going to write it on, and then you could see where that change was being proposed.
Okay, before you do, though,
okay,
let me see if I can. The objective here is very simple. We don't want residents of this project to be parking other than at the project. That's it, right? So if it is discovered, whether it's by Safeway Property Management or somebody else, that residents are in fact using other parking areas, non-Atlas parking areas, then there needs to be a mechanism to encourage them to stop doing that. If it's selling their car and taking a bus, fine, or if it's whatever it is. So I guess I would prefer, frankly, and if any commissioners disagree with me, that's, this is time to bring it up, that the condition recognize the objective upon which I believe we all agree, and the method of attaining that objective is not specifically defined. That will be a TBD that will be acceptable to the city and acceptable to the applicant. Now, I understand that we're talking about, again, the first one out the door, and we need to be aware of the precedent aspect of this. So if we adjust the code for these without an application for a variance and all that kind of stuff, what do we do with the next applicant that comes up? But I still think that the basic point that we don't want the city to look like it's setting parking fees is legitimate, and I don't think we have to get to the objective.
Well,
Okay.
I think that's why Lucy was going to add that one option is changing the rental charge monthly or other appropriate mechanisms until a reasonable rate of use is achieved. So we're not saying what you do. We're just saying meeting your end objective.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So while we're waiting, has anybody heard what the Mariners score is? See
So
that? Go ahead, Mike.
I'm just a little concerned about writing this on the fly, but let's see how this goes, see where we end up here.
So I think one thing I would like to add is this is the land use condition. We can polish this language before it's put on the building permit. So, I mean, I think we're trying to set a framework, but I don't think it has to be this exact language that goes on to the building permit. What we'd have to do is capture the intent of this when it's put on the building permit.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, but that gets into the thing that I was talking about earlier about how do we end up knowing that what's done is what, you know, and there's no collusion or anything like that. That's not the issue, but I'm not sure how we become aware of what the answer here is that you know, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and read this and see if we have any objections from anybody here, and then
Okay.
we'll.
So the condition as it stands right now is from time to time, as the property owner conducts surveys of the parking usage on site, the property owner will self-report the information to the city. If the city identifies that there appears to be off-site impacts due to low on-site parking usage, the city may request that the property owner will conduct a paid parking survey during a peak use period acceptable to the director to ascertain and confirm that paid parking is being rented at a reasonable rate based on resident car ownership, vacancy rates, etc. If rental rates of paid parking do not achieve a reasonable usage rate of the paid parking stalls, the property owner must adjust the rental charge or other acceptable actions monthly until such time as the reasonable use rate is achieved. The parking survey must be submitted within 2 weeks of its completion and monthly thereafter until minimum usage rate is achieved.
Can I, Mr. Chair, can I suggest another path? This is very specific performance criteria, and I'm just, the long term, how this plays long term and how this, you know, parking and et cetera, kind of evolves in this part of the city over time gets a little concerning to me. I understand the concern that council has raised on this one, and I'm a little concerned about writing something that is a condition of a permit that we're going to act on here that has legal standing. And so here's another suggestion that allows maybe a little bit more massaging of language, as you were suggesting. Maybe we just do a simple condition that says something to the effect that from this action, that staff will work with the applicant to establish a process to ensure on-site parking management mitigates the potential for spillover parking from this project to neighboring properties. Then it says, okay, that's an issue we're concerned about, and it just says to establish a process to ensure on-site parking management. So it's a way to try to hold the applicant and the long-term property manager.
Could you say that again
accountable.
slowly, and I'll write it on here and put it up so everyone can look
Yeah,
at it?
and I would also say that the word mitigate there is really relevant. I think Commissioner Brennan used the right word as opposed to prevent, because the issue is not absolute prevention. The issue is avoidance of an issue. And if it's, so I don't think we need to say nobody parks in Safeway, but what we don't want to get in, we want to mitigate rather than prevent.
Okay. So the language was staff will work with the applicant. You have a, sorry? To establish a process to ensure.
Hold on, I'm not as fast. Establish a process to ensure.
On-site parking management mitigates the potential for spillover parking. I don't know if this is the right word, but it'll get the point across. From this project to neighboring properties. So essentially it says it's not legislating the process that we'll use. It's saying work with the applicant to find a way to address the concern. And I don't know.
On behalf of the applicant, Commissioner, I think this accomplishes what the applicant feels they can accomplish in terms of working with the city in a very practical way.
Good.
And as I'm sure the Commissioner knows, parking management plans are something developers are used to working with.
Yes, thank you.
I hate to do this, but I'm going to wordsmith here, because this is, again, setting a precedent, okay? So I think staff and applicant will cooperate to identify a process to mitigate off-site parking.
Okay. I need you to say that again.
Okay.
Hold on, let me do it this way.
All right.
I should be typing on screen instead, but I didn't think of that.
Keep it as.
All right, I guess I can't do that.
Get the.
Okay, I guess you're going to get to see me right. Okay. Staff,
They do parking.
was it staff and the applicant will collaboratively?
Well, staff and applicant will cooperate or collaborate to identify a process. Now, Commissioner Brandon, you said that the wording of the on-site parking management is technical language?
Well,
I mean, is that?
Parking management plans are, as was noted, are a pretty common piece of property management, so that's what they call them, parking management programs.
Okay, well, the objective that I had here was just to say, look, the applicant and the city staff will identify a process to prevent spillover parking in neighboring properties.
Well, preventing it.
I'm sorry, mitigate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
mitigate. There we go. That goes back to my own point. Okay?
So I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the
So it
edit.
says staff and applicant will collaborate to identify a process to mitigate spillover property from this project to neighboring properties.
Spillover
mitigate.
parking. Spillover parking. Yeah. On neighboring property.
Right. Parking this, spillover parking from this project to neighboring properties.
Can we say the potential for spillover parking? Because as of today, we don't know that there will be any spillover parking.
Well, I think potential is implied.
Okay, that's fine.
If it doesn't happen, then this process isn't going to be necessary.
No
Okay.
mitigation necessary.
Right.
Mariners, 6-4.
Okay.
That's 5 in a row?
I think
They lost the early game.
Oh.
Okay.
you didn't identify yourself. Okay, so, all right.
I love how the words are all dropping
Yeah,
out.
okay, so staff and applicant will collaborate to identify a process to mitigate spillover parking from this project to neighboring properties.
Yes.
Okay? Okay. Is that acceptable?
That's fine with me.
All right.
So so you have a proposed motion.
Yeah.
These three conditions would appear between the two.
Right.
In the sort of bulleted area. And then any other conditions the commission wants to propose. I seem to remember that Commissioner Brennan had
It's two, right? Did you have
one
Mike?
one or two.
So, how are we going to do this as a motion? Do we want to do a main motion and add the conditions, or was just want to add the conditions and then
Well,
we can amend it from there?
Let's make the motion with the following conditions.
Okay.
And then that would include the ones that the city has already identified and your proposed conditions, and then we can take the motion and discuss.
Right, so there are probably two ways to do it. One, you could do two separate steps. One is add the conditions and then approve. The second is to include the revised conditions as part of the overall motion. Either one's acceptable.
So, I'm going to add, so before we make the motion, because I'm just going to
Okay.
make a motion that adds all of the conditions
All right,
that
good.
that we've discussed,
Yep,
and I'll
good.
try to identify what they are. But I also just want to note that the other conditions that I want to add, so in the staff report, tonight's staff report on page 4 of 19, under item number 1, there was a proposed new condition that I want to include as well, and that reads, "The design of all three buildings shall include treatments at the top of the buildings such as changes in materials, color, and/or height to create a top to the buildings." That was
So the way the motion is written right now, the conditions in the memo are added.
included, okay.
So you would, unless you want to edit or not accept those conditions, you don't need to take any
Okay,
further
thank you.
action.
Then that's what I would propose, that we just go ahead and add that condition.
Yeah, because it says, subject to the conditions therein and as proposed. So that allows us, that is the wording that allows the commission to add additional motions, or I'm sorry, conditions to this motion.
Oh, of course you have the ability
No,
to do that. I'm just saying that if the purpose is just to accept the conditions that are already
Right.
acceptable in the memo, you don't need to specifically call those
Read them.
out because
Right.
the motion already identifies that the conditions in the memo would be included.
Okay, the other condition that I want to discuss here quickly that I'll add to the motion if there's concurrence here, and that was related to the 7th Avenue Northwest concerns. And the condition would read, I'll read it quickly and then we'll try to capture it for the record. Assess the need for the addition of traffic calming or controls on 7th Avenue Northwest to ensure traffic safety is maintained in response to the increased use of this street created by the project. So essentially it is saying there's additional traffic, let's make sure that we're not creating some condition for the existing properties as a result of the new trips that are going to create safety concerns. So it's essentially just saying, let's look hard at that, let's make sure that staff is taking a hard look at that. So that's what that
Okay.
condition means.
So we'll give the applicant a chance to respond. I think staff would just say that the streets have been designed for the level, the standard is intended for the level of traffic that is proposed, for what that's worth.
Okay. Any
Read it again. Do you mind reading it again?
Sure. Says, the question is, it is just, again, the purpose is the additional traffic and concerns that were expressed about conflict. So it is, the condition is to assess the need for the addition of traffic calming or contours on 7th Avenue Northwest to ensure traffic safety is maintained in response to the increased use of the street created by this project. Doesn't require it, it just says, let's make sure we take a hard look at it. If the engineers agree that, as staff has just suggested, that we've already looked at it and we're comfortable with it, then check the box. But I just want to be responsive to what we've heard and kind of what we're seeing from this project. So, the applicant appears to be okay with that. Do we need any more for the record?
No, I was just gonna, I didn't know if you wanted it up there to read. Okay. I don't know, I do better reading than listening.
Writer's cramp. Okay. Mr. Chair, I move that the Development Commission approve the site development permit and the shoreline substantial development permit for the 7th at Gilman, or the Atlas project, file numbers SDP 1300005 and SHO 13-00014, as described and evaluated in the staff report dated April 10th, 2014, and project drawings received March 13th, 2014, briefing response memo dated May 2nd, 2014, and subject to the conditions therein, with the additional conditions as stated. There is a condition, new condition, as described, dealing with construction permit review. The city and the applicant will work to identify elements of a public education plan related to the potential loading or to potential flooding. The education plan will include signs in the garage and legal notice to ensure that future owners of the property are aware of the site characteristics. Other possible components might include information, I can't read the word. Provided to residents during leasing and residents. With an additional new condition that says during the construction of Building C, its courtyard will be evaluated by staff and the applicant to determine if a secondary minor walkway is warranted. If appropriate, the walkway will be of low impact, such as stepping stones. Additionally, modification to condition 8 as noted in the staff report to read, staff and the applicant will collaborate to identify a process to mitigate spillover parking from this project to neighboring properties.
And then the condition you had a moment.
And then the final additional condition would be the addition of the condition, assess the need for the addition of traffic calming or controls on 7th Avenue Northwest to ensure traffic safety is maintained in response to the increased use of the street created by the project.
Commissioner Brennan, is it controls or contours? You've said it both ways.
It would be controls.
Okay.
It would be traffic calming or controls.
Perfect.
We have a second. Is there any further discussion?
Could you read the lower part of the motion as well? Or do you do that as a separate motion?
We've got a single, yeah, we'll do that as a separate motion.
Yeah, it's going to be separate.
We'll do that as a separate motion.
So it has been moved and seconded. There is no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And there's no opposition. We will therefore go to the second.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Development Commission direct the Development Services Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by the Development Commission Chair, affirming the Development Commission's decision to approve the 7th at Gilman project, aka Atlas. File numbers SDP 13-00005 and SHO 13-00014, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated April 10th, 2014, and project Drawings received March 13th, 2014. Briefing response memo dated May 2nd, 2014, and subject to the conditions therein and as were amended this evening in the previous motion.
There is a second. Is there any further discussion of the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It is unanimous. Therefore,
Thank you.
Done?
the meeting is adjourned. I don't believe there's, and I don't believe, I just said it is adjourned, but I don't believe there's any further notice for other projects or anything that we need to get on the public record. Christopher? No? Okay, great.
We can go home? Yep. Thank you.
So keep those handwritten ones, because those will be the ones we'll use.
Good luck. This is here's the condition.
Perfect.